I literally didn't do a video for you guys in a long time, and that was rude of me. And now you guys are gonna get some more today, and I won't even be surprised if I make another one after that, because we only have chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24 after that, and so I won't even be surprised if I change the video title to chapters 16 through 24. Because I would do something like that. There's just a thing at the very end. If you count the 25 chapters, there is a sequel to this, and I will read it, but I don't know if I'm going to read there's 3 books. It's a 3-part book series, fanfic series, and the last one never got finished, so I might not be reading that one on the channel, but I will probably be reading the other one. The other one is so long. I love the other one. We get to see violent Will Solace. I should probably shut up now before I spoil anything. But let's get into it, because I landed you guys on a bad spot. Like, I didn't really measure what happened at the end of the chapters. I was just like, yeah, we'll just do these chapters. So we're going to be doing another video today and hoping it ends on a good note. And then we'll do some more tomorrow, and that'll be the end of Healing in the Dark. Which is insane, because this is only the 3rd video to this series. And I have like 5 Dark Demigod videos, and I haven't finished that series in a while. I wrote that series, and it's terribly written, but apparently you guys love it, so I will continue the series, maybe, later. So I can't stop feeling in love with this water bottle. I'm going to be getting hopefully save up some money, so I can buy some Percy Jackson stuff, so I can do some Percy Jackson videos in my life. I just had to get these stickers. But anyway, enough about me. Let's get into the video, because it is about time I got back into this story. And we read it like an hour ago. Okay, Will's point of view. It'd been 24 hours since Nico had last been conscious. While his injuries were severe, the son of Hades had shown some sort of life signs. Tears stung at Will's eyes. He was under incredible stress as he did not know what to do. He was also exhausted, having stayed up all night monitoring Nico. Jason had as well, just as Will predicted. He had woken up a couple of hours later, reassured Piper that he was all right, and returned to sit with Will through the night. Currently, Jason was bouncing his leg up and down, and Will was pacing. At midnight, Jason and Will had made a pact that if Nico didn't wake up by 9 the next morning, they would go get Chiron. Will agreed, assuming Nico would be awake before then. It was now 8:30, and Nico was still dead to the world. Will did not want to break the doctor-patient confidentiality he and Nico had, but desperate times. Nico would hate him forever if he revealed his self-harm to anyone. Too many people knew already. Will, Jason, and now Kayla. It's 8:30. Should we get help? Nico should have been awake by now. Well, why hasn't he woken up? Jason asked. I don't know, and it is killing me. I don't know why he isn't waking up, but we agreed on 9 to go get help, so we will wait it out. The silence re-entered the room, only disturbed by the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the flow of oxygen into Nico's mask. Will forced himself to take deep, relaxing breaths. Nico was going to wake up, wasn't he? Will hadn't been too late, had he? If Nico died, it would be Will's fault. He forced down the panic rising inside him. Nico isn't going to die. He is going to wake up. There was no other option. Unnoticed to Jason or Will, who were too wrapped up in their own heads, the son of Hades had moved. Nico's point of view. When he first came to, he heard the infernal beeping of the heart monitor, and the feel of a mask over his nose and mouth, which meant he was in the infirmary. Why was he in the infirmary? A kaleidoscope of memories came flooding in. Nightmare, Bianca, his mother, broken mirror, blood, Jason. Then nothing. If he was in the infirmary, that meant Jason had told Will, and he had promised that he wouldn't. He cursed mentally. He felt uncomfortable, so he readjusted in his bed without opening his eyes. If he was in the infirmary, he guessed that Will was probably watching him, since he had almost killed himself, which Will was probably going to be watching him like a hawk. There goes my plans to search for Leo, Nico thought. He wanted to keep his search a secret, not wanting to give false hope to anyone if he could not bring Leo back. But in order in order to search for him, he needed to leave camp. To leave camp, he needed to shadow travel. With Will and Jason watching him every move, he wouldn't be able to search for him. Stupid, he thought. Why had he relapsed and got caught relapsing? Everything would have been fine if he hadn't been caught. Hadn't cut too deeply into his skin. He hated himself even more. He wanted to rip back into his flesh to punish himself for being stupid. He clenched his fist together, feeling angry pulse through his being at himself, at Jason for finding him, at Will for constantly mothering him. Well, I think Nico just moved. He heard footsteps hurry to his side. A hand grabbed his wrist. The hand then worked its way into his hand, causing him to release the fist. Nico? Will whispered inches from his ear. Nico, are you awake? Nico's eyes flashed open, anger still pulsing through him. He was greeted with Will's sapphire orbs. They sparkled with concern and worry. Nico also noticed bags under his eyes, showing his sleepless nights. A stab of guilt cut through his anger. Will had lost sleep over him. The son of Apollo had healed him after all the terrible things Nico had said to him. Anger at himself surged through him once again, so he tried to sit up to get away from Will's stare. Will held him down, and Nico was too weak to fight back. You don't have enough strength right now, Nico. Lie back down. Nico slowly lowered Nico back into the bed. Nico then assessed his surroundings. He wasn't in the infirmary. He was in his cabin. He looked around and saw Jason standing a little behind Will. Nico's eyes flashed when he tried to get up again. Jason raised his arms defensively, as if expecting Nico to attack. Will forced Nico back down. Nico tried to fight again, but his energy was slowly draining. Eventually, his struggle stopped, and he looked up at Will. I know you are mad at him, but he saved your life, Will explained. Nico's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Will clarified. You lost a lot of blood. Jason gave you some of his in order to replenish your supply. Jason saved you. The words took a moment to sink in. When they did, Nico realized the truth. Jason had saved him. While he was grateful that he was still alive, he still felt betrayed by the son of Jupiter. He regained eye contact with Jason. Jason's eyes dropped from Nico's accusing stare. You have every right to be upset. I broke your trust. His eyes flew back up. But I am not sorry for telling Will. You almost died, Nico. As Jason's voice raised, so did Nico's anxiety. Why would you do that to us? Did you think we wouldn't care if you died? You didn't think... Enough. Jason's tirade was cut off by Will's quiet voice. Nico looked up at Will, who was staring back at him. Somehow Will had sensed Nico's impending panic attack and had stopped the cause of it. Nico doesn't need that right now. Will's eyes fluttered with concern again. What do you need, Nico? Are you feeling okay? Nico shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. Black dots danced in his eyes. At the sudden movement of his head, he swallowed out nausea. He just wanted to be left alone. How about you get some more sleep, Nico? It'll make you feel better. Nico nodded, relaxing on the pillows. He shut his eyes and willed himself to sleep. He felt Will's hand lightly touch his. He flinched, pulling his hand back. And Will slowly retracted his hand. Before he knew it, he sunk into sleep. Whispers broke Nico out of his slumber. I'm worried about him, Will. Jason's voice sounded over him. I am too, Will said. How are we supposed to help him if he won't talk to us? We have to wait for him to open up. He needs to realize that he can trust us, realize that we won't judge him or anything. And how do we do that? Will sighed, exaggerating at Jason's question. And that is the number one question, Grace. What do we do until he actually opens up to us? Be there for him. Show him that we care and that he can trust us. Try to prevent this from happening again. Encourage him to open up. We really need to figure out what his triggers are, because one moment he is normal, brooding self, and the next he is having a panic attack. Jason sighed. His triggers are probably memories from Tartarus, but how would we stop those? Those are memories. It's not like he can just turn them off. At this, Will's doctor side came out. He's probably been repressing them, which is why the memories are plaguing him right now. I'm not an expert with post-traumatic stress disorder, with flashbacks and nightmares, but I have heard the best treatment is to talk about it and relive the memories. Maybe to accept that they happened and start to let them go, though that might be difficult considering Nico has apparently taken a vow of silence. How can he let something like Tartarus go? Jason whispered. Comment seemed to fill the room. I don't know. I truly do not know, Will admitted. Will was giving up on him. Nico felt tears burn at his closed eyes. There was no hope. Tartarus was going to torment him for the rest of his life. He felt the tears squeeze out and run down his face. He prayed the other two wouldn't notice, but of course they did. He felt a hand brush the tear away. He willed himself not to flinch at the unexpected touch. Is he crying? Is he awake? Jason whispered. Nico felt a hand on his wrist. Gosh, he thought, don't let them know I'm awake. They'll just yell at me for hurting myself. Will spoke quietly. He is still asleep. He must be dreaming. Why don't you get some sleep, Jason? You've been up all night. Jason let out a noise of agreement, and Nico heard him get into an empty bunk. Nico started to relax, glad to not have been found out, when he felt a pair of lips pressed against his forehead, accompanied by Will's voice, his breath rustling his hair. Oh, Nico, what is going on in that head of yours? Will pulled back. He spoke in a low tone again. I am going to help you. I swear. He grabbed Nico's hand, and Nico didn't pull away. Will's point of view. Will woke up to find his fingers still intertwined with Nico D'Angelo's. Will grinned giddily and looked around. He realized that he was in the Hades cabin, and then he remembered why he was in the cabin. The grin wavered a bit, and Will focused on his patient. He was surprised to see Nico twitching every so often, little groans coming out of his mouth every so often. He was dreaming. Well, Will knelt down in front of Nico, shaking him gently, trying not to wake Jason. After a minute, Will's shaking paid off, and Nico sat up with a gasp, ripping himself from his own recollections. Will saw fear flashing in the boy's eyes, his walls down. Before Nico realized where he was, he reached for the side table, looking for something, but Will stopped him. He knew exactly what Nico was looking for. Bared from his blade, Nico slowly began to fold in on himself, pulling his legs up to his chest, but Will prevented him. Nico tried to protest, but Will shushed him. He sat back in his chair, bent down so he could look Nico in the face. He placed his hands firmly on Nico's shoulders, preventing him from moving. Nico struggled, but then relaxed, realizing Will wasn't hurting him. What happened? What did you see? Nico shook his head, refusing to speak. Please tell me, Nico. I just want to help. Another shake of the head. Nico? Onyx's eyes looked into his, but Nico soon looked down at his lap, freeing one of his hands. Will pushed up Nico's chin, forcing him to look up. Nico's eyes opened, looking straight at Will. Was it Tartarus? Fear flooded into Nico's eyes. That was an answer to itself, but Nico gave him confirmation. He paused for a moment and slowly nodded. Will bit his lip and moved his hand so it rested on Nico's cheek. Nico didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes closed, and he turned his head into Will's palm, nuzzling it. A tear slid down Nico's face, and Will used his thumb to brush it away. It's okay to cry, Nico. It's okay to not be okay. You've been through a lot. You deserve to let it all out. At that, Will watched Nico's walls shoot back up. Nico brushed Will's hand away and used his sleeve to wipe away any sign of crying. He pushed himself up, ignoring Will's protests, and tried to stand. Will moved to stop him when Nico suddenly stumbled, not realizing how weak he was and how damaged his legs were. Will caught him and Nico whimpered. Will's heart broke as he carefully lowered them to the floor. Nico burst into tears and Will rushed to soothe him, rubbing circles on his back. It's okay, Nico. It's okay to cry. Shh. It's okay to need help. His voice sounded right in Nico's ear so he could be heard over Nico's sobbing. It's good to ask for help. It shows you are strong enough to know when you need help dealing with something. Let me help you. Nico's face rested against Will's chest. He wrapped his arms more securely around the boy. Nico clung more tightly to him, which Will took as the boy accepting his help. Will heard a movement and his eyes shot up. His eyes locked with Jason's, who was cautiously moving out of his bed. Will shook his head once, knowing Will would be overwhelmed with more than one person. He gestured with his head to the door. Jason nodded and mouthed, "Good luck," as he silently slid out the door. Will focused back to his patient. Nico's sobs finally lessened about an hour later, and the death grip he had on Will's shirt loosened. Nico's face finally emerged after being buried in Will's chest. Using his arm, Nico wiped away the dry tears and the tear tracks that had been left on his face. He was beginning to pull away from Will, but the son of Apollo stopped him. Nico started to struggle, but Will refused to let go. He shifted them, so Nico was leaning against the bed, and Will was sitting in front of him, their legs still intertwined. Nico's eyes locked onto Will's and stayed there. Will didn't want to break the moment, but he needed to know what was going on with Nico. Are you okay? He answered with a nod. Do you want to talk about it? Shake of the head. Nico, eyes flickered up to Will's, but quickly looked away. You need to tell me what's going on so I can help you. He was interrupted by the son of Hades, who had refused to speak for days. I don't need to tell you anything. It's my personal business, not yours. His voice was hoarse. It becomes my business when the flashback triggers you to hurt yourself, Nico. Nico flinched at the harsh tone, so Will tried to make his tone more calming. I'm just trying to help you. You may have some pretty bad injuries, and I need to check how your legs are. Nico shrugged. It's not that big of a deal. This set Will off. He had been trying so hard to keep his composure, but if Nico acted like almost killing himself wasn't a big deal. It isn't a big deal. Will lowered his voice in a scary tone, calm. It's not a big deal that you feel the need to cut yourself because of the nightmares you are reliving every night. It's not a big deal that you avoid these painful memories you are refusing to sleep. It's not a big deal that you haven't eaten a decent meal in weeks. It isn't a big deal that you almost faded out of existence. Will's voice was getting louder and stronger with emotion, but he pressed on. It's not a big deal. Why? Because you think you're worthless, or that you think you don't mean anything? Let me make one thing very clear. You are worth it. You are beyond good enough. You, Nico D'Angelo, are a hero, whether you like it or not. You mean the world to me and hell of a lot of people. So you need to stop this thing where you think that nobody gives a crap about you and think about how much you are hurting those with the things you do to yourself. Instead of isolating yourself, you should rely on those people who care about you. They want to help. I want to help you. You are not alone in this. Will finished his spiel, breathing heavily. Nico looked shell-shocked to hear someone speak to him with so much emotion. Will got his breathing back under control and cleared his throat as if nothing had happened. So can I check your legs now? Nico's eyes opened in shock, but he slowly nodded his head. He moved his hands away from his thighs as Will started to examine them. The bandages were soaked through with dry blood. He looked at Nico for permission to remove the bandages, but Nico merely looked away in shame. Will peeled off the bandages and looked at the gashes. They were still bloody, cutting very deep into his skin. Will had done the best he could with the stitches, but at the time he was preoccupied with making sure Nico wasn't going to die. Will, with feather-light touches, slowly traced the gashes. Nico gasped and flinched, but didn't pull away. Will closed his eyes and his hands began to glow, murmuring a rhyme to Apollo. Will moved his hands over Nico's injuries for 2 minutes or so. Suddenly, the glow stopped and Will's eyes slowly opened. That had been draining on Will's energy. He looked at Nico's thighs. The gashes had started to close up. It would at least be easier for Nico to walk, maybe without a limp. Will felt lightheaded and saw black spots dance in his vision. That had been the third time he had been using his healing power, which he was supposed to use sparingly, as it exhausted him this week. He had pushed himself to the limit. Will slowly lowered his head into his hands and braced himself on the floor. He realized Nico was shaking his shoulder and saying something. It took a couple of minutes, but Nico's voice finally registered. Will, are you okay? Should I get someone? Will looked up to see Nico D'Angelo's face inches in front of his. They were within kissing distance. Nico stopped talking, and Will got lost in Nico's eyes. Will's eyes flicked down to Nico's lips and back up, and then he cursed himself mentally for doing that. He wasn't about to kiss Nico. That would be unbelievably inappropriate. And Will didn't know if Nico was even gay. He had been born in the 1930s, so Nico probably scorned homosexuals. Will's gaze finally broke, moving his eyes away from Nico's. Will felt himself blush and saw Nico blushing too. He cleared his throat. I'm okay, thanks. I'm just going to finish. He started wrapping new bandages around Nico's thighs. His hands were shaking, as it did because he was losing strength. Nico placed his hand on Will, steadying him. Will glanced up, touched by the gesture. He focused back on his work, Nico steadying him. He finished up with Nico's thighs and continued looking him over. The slits on his wrists had already started to heal as well, but not as deep as the cuts on his thighs. Will, he let out a noise to show he had heard Nico. Are you okay? He looked up to Nico's concerned eyes. That was a reverse of roles. Will was supposed to be asking Nico if he was okay. Not the other way around. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Will's eyes widened in shock at how hypocritical Nico was being. I'm assuming that you've been with me the entire time I've passed out. That probably means you haven't eaten or slept in a couple of days. Wait a second. I'm not the patient here. You are. I've been watching over you and making sure you were okay. That means I don't get to eat or don't sleep. Then so be it. Your well-being is my number one concern. Nico looked shocked at the words, as if he couldn't imagine someone caring about him that much. The two boys lapsed in silence. After a minute, Will gained eye contact with the son of Hades. Nico's eyes were filled with something Will didn't expect. Gratitude. Will raised his eyebrows in response. Thank you for healing me. Yeah, Will smiled. You are very welcome. Now you should eat something and get some sleep. Nico looked nauseous at the idea of food, but Will continued. You need food whether you like it or not. You won't have to eat a lot, but you do need to eat. I'm going to go down to the dining hall and get you some fresh food. Nico nodded and watched as Will got up and departed the cabin. Will closed the door and started to walk to the pavilion. Breakfast was in full swing, so Will's late arrival was noticed. The whole camp seemed to look at him as he made his way over to the Apollo table. He was stopped by 3 very angry demigods, Percy, Annabeth, and Piper. Jason was standing behind, but had a sympathetic face towards Will. Percy took Will by the upper arm and led him away from the pavilion. Once they were out of sight of the campers, they began raining questions on him. Where's Nico been? Annabeth asked. We tried to go to his cabin, but Jason stopped us, saying he wasn't there, Piper supplied. Jason said that Nico was okay, but he isn't telling us anything else, so that you were handling it. So what happened? Percy questioned. Will held his hand up for silence and was surprised when he got it. Nico got himself into a little bit of trouble doing something for his dad, but he is okay. He is just embarrassed that he got injured, so he didn't want anyone else to know. Will surprised himself with how easily he lied, but he was determined to protect Nico's secret. So I ask to please respect his privacy and give him this time to heal. He does not need to be questioned about what happened. It is his decision to open up, if he chooses to do so. Are you sure he's all right? Percy asked. Will nodded. I've been working over him, and I'm currently trying to get some food for him. So if you would please excuse me. He dismissed himself from the group, heading back to the dining hall. He had hoped his request that Nico's friends give him privacy would be followed, but he knew how stubborn these demigods were. He sighed as he arrived back at the pavilion. Anyway. Chapter 17. Nico's point of view. Anyway. 2 weeks had passed since Nico had woken up from the first time after his incident. Nico had slowly started rebuilding strength, training with Jason, Percy, Piper, or Annabeth in the arena every day. He could tell that when he had suggested training to Will, his healer had been concerned, but he watched closely by Jason any time he trained. Jason still had a Stygian iron sword, but he was managing just fine with the practice swords. Nico didn't even know where Jason had taken his sword, but he was doubtful he would get it back. Give it back to him anytime soon. Although he had built his strength up, feeling ready to start searching for Leo, Will still forbade him from shadow traveling. While Nico usually ignored his healer's orders, Will had been keeping very close to Nico, rendering it impossible for Nico to leave. Will and Jason must have set an agreement because one of the two was always with Nico. Will had spent every night the past 2 weeks with Chiron's permission in the Hades cabin. Whenever Nico screamed himself awake from a nightmare, Will had been there trying to calm him down. He had also prevented Nico from hurting himself when the nightmares had been extremely severe. When Will went to fulfill his duties as head counselor during the day, Jason took over, dragging Nico out of his cabin and signing both their cabins up for the same activities. Even when Nico refused to leave his cabin, Jason would sit with him inside all day, trying to talk to him or just reading a book. At first, the son of Jupiter's presence was irksome, but Nico and Jason's friendship had grown. Nico had opened up to Jason about a few minor things in his life, and Jason told Nico some of his own secrets. The two boys talked a lot about Leo, and Nico couldn't imagine what Jason was feeling. He had lost his best friend. Jason and Nico's relationship had strengthened along with the formation of a close friendship between Will and Nico. Will would usually come to the Hades cabin after dinner and try to talk to Nico as well. Nico would sometimes give him a little information about himself, but usually he let Will do all the talking. Even when Will had run out of things to say, just being in his presence made Nico feel good. He realized that he was beginning to have feelings for the son of Apollo. The constant doctoring and worrying were annoying, but he began to realize that Will really cared about him, and Nico really cared about him as well. It was just after the camp bonfire, and Will was walking Nico back to his cabin. The son of Apollo had informed Nico that he would be leaving him alone tonight, saying that he trusted Nico not to do anything stupid. The boys arrived on the steps at cabin 13. Will continued his lecture, and if you have any nightmares, don't hesitate to find me. You know where I'll be. Well, I'll be fine. I was on my own for a while. I can survive by myself in my cabin. I'm not afraid of the dark, he joked, but Will looked wary. All right, but seriously, his eyes sparkled with sincerity. Don't hesitate to find me if you have nightmares. You're just starting to heal, but we can't risk losing you again. I promise, Nico said. Will smiled. Good night. Sleep well. He squeezed Nico's hand. He let go, and Nico missed his warmth. Will smiled and jogged back to his cabin. Nico sighed and entered his cabin. He had agreed with Will that he needed to ease off the shadow travel. The last time he had done it had been a close call, but he gained a lot of strength back. He was ready. He ran through his plan as he prepared a small backpack with supplies. He would shadow travel down to the underworld to ask his father about Leo. Hopefully he would get some answers. First he had to go to Jason's cabin to get his sword and get his sword back. He doubted Jason would just give it to him, so he planned on sneaking in while Jason was asleep. It was barely after 10 now, so Nico planned to wait it out a couple of hours. It was past midnight when Nico quietly opened the door to the zoo's cabin. He figured that Jason would have returned to his cabin by this time after sneaking off with Piper to do whatever heterosexual couples usually did. The moon spilled some light into the marble cabin. Jason was asleep, his mouth open and glasses falling off his face. Nico smirked before surveying the room, searching for his sword. It was in the far corner, emitting its blackish glow. He grabbed the hilt, feeling safer than he had in days. He sheathed it by its side. He didn't realize that Jason had opened his eyes. He adjusted his glasses and noticed Nico. Nico! Nico whipped around. Jason's eyes were clouded with sleep. What are you doing here? Did you have a nightmare? He started to get more alert, sitting up. Why do you have a backpack? Are you going somewhere? Nico put his finger to his lips, and Jason surprisingly stopped talking. Nico pointed at Jason, and he fell promptly asleep. One of Nico's abilities was hypnokinesis. He was one of the only non-hypnos children to be able to wield it. Unfortunately, using the power drained him. He steadied himself on the bed frame and breathed in and out a few seconds. When the black spots disappeared, he made his way out of the cabin. Realizing that using a little bit of his hypnokinetic power had drained him, he decided that he wouldn't shadow travel that night. Instead, he would use Mrs. O'Leary. Walking towards the woods and into the deeper darkness, he whistled loudly and waited. He heard huge footsteps and was bulldozed by a furry brick wall. He patted Mrs. O'Leary and managed to fight away from her tongue as she licked him to death. He got to his feet and calmed her down enough to climb on her back. He whispered into her ear that he wanted to go to his father's palace, and her ears perked. She leaped into the shadow of a tree, and they were whisked into darkness. They materialized into the black marble palace of the god of the underworld. Mrs. O'Leary started barking, excited to be back in her home turf. Nico slid off of her and patted her on the neck. She scampered out the door and go play with Cerberus. Nico pushed open the doors of the entrance hall to the rest of the palace and began silently walking through the halls. He walked out on the balcony overlooking the fields of punishment. The fact that his father had this balcony disturbed Nico greatly. He shook his head and re-entered the palace. His father could be in his chambers, but he typically didn't sleep. After all, it was only 1 a.m. After scouring the palace and finding only skeleton servants, he guessed that his father might have been doing fortifications. After Thanatos had returned, so many escaped souls had been recalled to the underworld. Some of those spirits had not been entirely happy about being sent back and had attacked the palace. Not that Hades hadn't been able to take care of them, but when he was not at the palace, sometimes spirits broke in and destroyed the furniture. Hades was adding extra security against those angry spirits. Nico pushed his way through the front doors. He walked to the outside of the palace. Sure enough, he found his father directing a crew of skeleton workers adding black marble bricks to new walls. Every so often, Hades would point at the bricks and which glow and seal to the remaining bricks. He was lacing them with magic, ensuring spirits couldn't get past them. Nico walked to his father's side and watched the progress of the skeletons. His father finally spoke. I know why you are here. I'm surprised you didn't come sooner. I was delayed. Nico simply stated. He wasn't sure, but he thought he saw a smirk emerge on his father's face. Indeed. Who is that son of Apollo again? Walker? Nico felt heat rise into his cheeks. Father? Son? He said in the same tone. If you know why I'm here, do you have an answer for me? Nico forced himself to focus on his mission. His father looked bored as he continued building the wall. That depends. What will you do if I answer your question? No matter what your answer is, I will search for Leo Valdez. Are you sure you don't love this Valdez character instead of that son of Apollo? If you are willing to scour the entire globe for him. Father! His face flushed red again. His father smirked again and lazily looked at Nico. Well, I can tell you that he is not anywhere down here. A bubble of hope started expanding in Nico's chest. That meant Leo is alive. His father merely looked bored, turning back to his work, ignoring Nico. Right, okay, thank you, father. He turned away, purpose in his steps. His father had more to add. Wherever Valdez is, he's accompanied by a young goddess and a bronze dragon. Nico's eyes widened at that extra information. Jason had talked to him all about how Leo had gotten trapped with Calypso. Leo was apparently in love. The strength of his love had given Leo the power to come back to Ojogia. He had found and rescued Calypso. His father was right. Leo Valdez was certainly a character. His father gained eye contact with him, and Nico tried to show his gratitude by nodding. Once you are done with all this searching nonsense, remember that you have a job to do, Ghost King. I'll be sure to send some spirits to give you more information for your quest. His father turned back to his task, dismissing his son. Nico thanked his father and jogged down the hill of the palace. He whistled for Mrs. O'Leary, and she came bounding back. He jumped on her back and whispered in her ear. They melted into the darkness. A week had passed since Nico had gotten this information from his father. The morning after he'd gone to the underworld, Jason immediately sought him out and questioned why he'd been in his cabin. Nico simply said he had wanted his sword back as it made him feel safe. Jason said he believed him, but he had started to spend even more time with Nico during the day, as if to ensure he didn't use it. While Jason and Will still spent the majority of the day with Nico, he was still left alone during the night. As a result, he hadn't gotten a full night's sleep during that week. He had started to get ghost and skeleton informants sent to him by his father during the night, who provided him clues on Leo's location. When given this information, he would search for the missing demigod as well as his bronze dragon. He was getting closer to pinpointing Leo's location. He usually used Mrs. O'Leary, but campers had started to get suspicious that she was so exhausted, so Nico started shadow traveling himself. It had been nerve-wracking the first time he tried it, since almost fading from existence, but he managed to jump smaller distances. Unfortunately, the day after he had successfully jumped, Will had noticed it the moment he had walked out of his cabin. Nico had been dragged to the infirmary and interrogated by Will. "What did you do?" Will demanded. "I shadow traveled." "And what did I tell you about shadow traveling?" Nico's eyes fell from his end to the floor. "Not to do it." "Exactly. What were you thinking?" Will questioned. Nico scowled. "I'm fine, Solace. You just looked over me yourself and you said I was fine." Will sat on the cot next to Nico's. "But why did you need to do it? I thought you were comfortable at camp. I thought you were getting better." Nico didn't want to admit it, but he hadn't been getting better. The few hours he did manage to get his sleep at night were plagued his nightmares and terrible memories. While he didn't touch his arms, as Jason Will not so discreetly looked at them every day, little cuts started littering his thighs again, though Nico was careful not to cut too deeply. Self-harm was getting bad once again. "Hello, Nico," Will brought him back to reality. "I am getting better," Nico lied. "My father sent me down to the underworld to do a few tasks for him. I can't ignore a direct order from him. As much as he is my father, he is also my boss." "Wait, what are you talking about?" Will's eyes furrowed. In their long conversations, Nico hadn't gotten to the part about being Ghost King. "Don't worry about it," Nico said. "What aren't you telling me? I'm the current Ghost King," Nico admitted. A smile twitched onto Will's face. "Ghost King, right, and I'm the Princess Sunshine." Nico scowled. "I'm being serious. This is my official title since I killed Minos." Will held up a hand. Whoa, Minos as in King Minos? As in husband to Pasiphae and keeper of the Minotaur? Nico nodded. "He died years ago." "Fine, I banished him. His spirit managed to get out of the underworld into the labyrinth. That's where I met him." "You went to the labyrinth, met Minos, and then decided, wow, I should banish him?" Will asked, incredulous. "I was only 10 when I was in the labyrinth. I didn't know how to banish souls yet. Minos had to teach me, but that's beyond the point. I am the current Ghost King, and I was running errands for my father." Will considered him. And does Ghost King require you to use your powers, which I suggested that you didn't use?" Nico stood up from his cot. "Again, you can't ignore godly summons. I was just doing what my father asked me to." Will grabbed his arm, causing Nico to flinch. He still wasn't very comfortable with touching. Will's eyes were filled with concern. "What are you hiding from me?" Nico pulled his arm out. "Nothing. I'll see you later, Solace." After that conversation 2 days prior, Will had tried to avoid Will not, wanting to be interrogated every day after falling back into his own rhythm of shadow traveling. Earlier that morning, an informant had told him that he had spotted a bronze dragon and a crazy boy and a beautiful girl riding, leaving France and screaming about maple syrup. Nico made connection to Quebec, as French was spoken in both areas. He decided to go to Montreal first, as it was a major city, but jumping to Canada would be his furthest jump. So he had spent for a lot of the day. He had slept for a lot of the day and eaten a lot of food to prepare. Jason had forced him to stay for the bonfire, so he was currently watching Will sing horribly out of tune. As soon as he could, Nico headed to his cabin to prepare himself for his journey. He arrived at the doorway and a familiar voice stopped him. Nico. Crap, he thought. Hey, Solace. Nico turned to face the son of Apollo. I was wondering if you were okay. You've been distant the past couple of days, and you seem distracted at the bonfire. Nico had spent the day worrying about his long jump. He currently had an impulsive to tell Will in case he faded again, but he knew Will would try to stop him if he told him. His thoughts were interrupted by Will waving his hand in front of his face. Hello, Nico. He gained eye contact with Will. Sorry, I just zoned out. That's what I'm talking about. You've been doing this all day. I'm fine. Will, leave me alone. Will looked hurt, but Nico had to get rid of him. Okay, fine, but if you need to talk, come to me. If you have any nightmares, come and get you. Yeah, Nico finished. Will had said that to him every night, even though Nico had never come to him. Nico had a feeling that Will knew he was having nightmares. Whether it was his lack of sleep or Clovis was a gossip, he didn't know. All right, good night, Nico. Get some sleep, will ya? Will requested. Nico nodded and opened the door to his cabin, closing the door on the son of Apollo. He heard footsteps receding as Will walked away. He breathed a sigh of relief. He walked to his bed and began to pack up his stuff. This idiot. Anyway. 10 minutes later, he snuck outside his cabin. Darkness had fallen over the camp, so finding shadows was easy. He slipped into the darkness in New York and slipped out into Canada. Once he had pulled himself from the shadows, he fell to his knees, catching his breath. He was okay. He had made it in one piece. Finally getting his breathing under control, Nico began combing through the city. All the street signs were in French and English, indicating to Nico that he was in the correct place. He stopped next to a homeless man and asked him if anything unusual had happened in Brook. In English, the man explained how there had recently been a huge explosion at a warehouse on the edge of the city. From his gestures, Nico gathered that a flying object had flown from the warehouse carrying a boy and a girl. That's who he was looking for. He tossed a coin at the man, who thanked him. He slipped into an empty alley and closed his eyes. He had just missed them again. He rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, realizing he should explore the warehouse to find some clues as to where they could have gone. He got clear of the skyscrapers and saw a cloud of smoke. He was guessing that's where the explosion had occurred. Trekking across the city, he saw an abandoned warehouse. It had a hole ripped through the roof as a dragging hunk of metal had fallen through. Nico silently entered the warehouse. He walked through the tangle of machinery and heard a voice. Curse that demigod. How dare he put a hole through our roof? The voice was gruff. Oh, quit your whining. I'm more upset that we lost him as our meal, and I'm going to get the girl as my wife. Did you hear how rude she was about my eye? Another gruff voice answered. Nico made the connection. Cyclops. He stifled a gasp. He couldn't face two Cyclopses. He was so sleep-deprived and worn out from shadow traveling that he didn't know if he could defeat a training mummy. He stepped back into a table. A hammer hit the ground with a deafening thud. The two voices stopped. What was that? One whispered. Nico stayed still, hoping not to alert his presence. He heard sniffing. I smelled demigod. That was the last one with this demigod. No, this one is different. He reeks of death. Nico slowly started backing up to the door. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck rose up. He moved his hand to his sword and went to turn. When a sword tip ripped through his stomach, he gasped as it wrenched, and he fell to his knees, grasping his stomach. He hadn't been fast enough. The Cyclops snuck up behind him. It came into view with a smile on his face, his sword dripping with Nico's blood. Look, brother, I found dinner. The Cyclops went to grab Nico, but the son of Hades reached for a shadow and was whisked out of sight. He didn't know where he would end up. Maybe shadow traveling relied on the subconscious, because he ended up in the middle of the Apollo cabin. He gasped in pain as black spots danced in his eyes. He heard several screams. He wavered on his feet as he gained eye contact with Will Solace. Will looked confused as to why Nico had appeared in his cabin at 1 a.m. Nico, what are you? Nico slowly removed his hand from his stomach, revealing his blood-stained fingers and the gaping wound. Will's eyes widened in horror. Nico! Nico's eyes rolled back into his head. He felt himself fall as he lost consciousness. Oh, Nico, what an idiot. Sometimes I wonder, is this guy just asking to get injured, or is it oh yeah, I'm just gonna do what's right? I know he cares about Leo as a friend, but seriously. Anyway. Will's point of view. He sprang to grab Nico before he hit the ground. Will wrapped his arms around the fading son of Hades. He could feel the darkness emitting from the boy as he slowly lowered him to the ground. Nico had been shadow traveling. Though he was not close to fading out of existence again, Will could feel he had been jumping quite frequently. The bigger concern was the gaping hole in Nico's stomach. His black shirt had been torn, revealing Nico's pale skin, dyed in his scarlet blood. The entrance wound was on Nico's back, showing that he had been stabbed in the back and the sword had sliced through his body before being removed. Will laid Nico down, closing his eyes as he muttered a spell. He ran his hands over Nico, trying to determine what else was wrong with the son of Hades. Centaur blood, poisonous for demigods, was coursing through Nico's veins. If Will didn't expel that soon, Nico's vital organs would start shutting down. In addition to the poisoning and gaping wound in his stomach, Nico was severely exhausted and malnourished. Will took a deep breath. He blocked out all the chaos around him and only had eyes for the son of Hades bleeding out in front of him. He had to save Nico. The next thing Will was aware of, he was being handed a glass of nectar and was sitting up in a bed. When had he gotten there? And why did he have an IV in him? He noticed sunlight streaming into the cabin. He looked up in confusion at Kayla, who was looking at him sympathetically. The last thing he remembered was, Nico! Nico was hurt! He started to stand, but Kayla held him back. Easy there, Will. You need to get your strength back. You used all your strength to heal. Will interrupted her. Nico, is he okay? Where is he? Kayla, I need to see him. He tried to get up, only to be pushed back down again. Nico is fine. You, however, are not. You are draining yourself. You need to sleep, Kayla admonished. At least tell me what happened. Kayla sighed and sat down next to Will. She looked exhausted if she'd been up all night. I don't remember anything. That's because you passed out. Will looked in alarm at her, and then she took a deep breath, continuing. Okay, I'll start at the beginning. Nico's shadow traveled in here, and he was severely injured. You caught him before he hit the ground and started looking over him. You went to your doctor mood and started giving orders. We all tried to help, but Nico was severely injured. We all got your supplies, and we did everything we could, but he was failing. Kayla took a deep breath. Will urged her to continue. He went into cardiac arrest. Will's heart dropped, but she kept going. You started panicking and pleading with Nico. Everyone was scrambling, trying to stabilize him, but suddenly you stopped while throwing out your hands. We were all thrown back. When we pushed ourselves up, we saw that you were surrounded by a golden aura. Will let that information sink in. He understood what it was. The blessing of Apollo, he whispered. Kayla nodded. Will leaned back in shock. I have not heard of any Apollo child having it in decades, Kayla said. Your dedication to and feelings from Nico must have been intense if you were able to invoke the blessing. Father rarely blesses anyone with it. She paused before continuing. The aura encased both you and Nico. You were literally glowing and the light was moving from you to Nico. It was as if you were giving your strength, your life force to Nico. We all watched as Nico's wounds began settling itself up, which shouldn't have been possible because of the poison on the sword. The clamminess of his skin faded and he looked almost healthy. Suddenly, the light went out and you collapsed. Nico sat up, gasping, and was conscious for only a moment before he passed out from exhaustion again. We all rushed over to you and Nico. It was unbelievable. Nico was completely healed. No wound, no poison. But it was horrible. You started seizing and had a dangerously high fever, reacting up to the centaur's blood that somehow went from Nico to you. You were dying. If it hadn't been for Chiron, she trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Her eyes flashed up to meet Will's. You almost killed yourself, sacrificed yourself to save Nico. Where is it? It would have been worth it, Will thought as he swallowed some nectar, trying to wrap his hand around the situation. Will did not want to die, but if his sacrifice meant saving someone, especially someone as important to him as Nico, then it would have been totally worth it. It would make up for the lives he'd lost. The people who had died under his care would stay with him forever. Well, Kayla's voice said. He gazed up at his sister. She took the glass from his hand before gently pushing him back down. Okay, you need more sleep. No, I'm fine. I need to see Nico. I need to check on him. Well, listen, Kayla started, but Will wasn't having him. He fought off her arms. I need to see him, make sure I healed him properly. Stop, Kayla shouted. He stopped fighting at her as her eyes shined with tears. Well, you almost died. You almost killed yourself. You have to put yourself first for once in your life. I know you really care about Nico, but you almost died. I almost lost you. Kayla rarely got this upset, so Will was shocked. He tried to put a positive spin on it. He looked at the clock on the wall. Well, it's only been a couple of hours, and I already woke up, so it couldn't have been that bad. It's been 3 days. Her voice was so quiet, Will almost didn't hear her. He thought he had misheard her. I'm sorry, what? Kayla closed her eyes, her head drooping before she raised it back up to look at Will. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Will's heart dropped. That's impossible, he started. That's when he noticed the dark circles under Kayla's eyes as she hadn't slept for 3 days. He looked around the room. There were empty IV bags hanging from his bedpost, along with empty baggies of ambrosia and empty vials of nectar. I'm not being dramatic when I said you almost died, Will. Kayla's voice strained as she held back tears. Your life force was fading. Chiron just barely arrived at the cabin in time. When he stabilized you, he didn't know if you were going to wake up. We had to start you on an IV so you wouldn't starve. After the second night, we had begun to lose hope that you were going to wake up. It was the most terrifying 3 days of my life. Will put his hands on to Kayla's shoulders. She grabbed his wrist, steadying herself against him. He placed his forehead onto hers. He closed his eyes, and they stayed like that for a few moments. He felt a wetness on his cheeks. He realized that she was crying. I'm right here, Kayla, he murmured. I promise, I'm okay. She swallowed some of her tears back. Don't ever do that to me again, she demanded as she threw herself into Will's arms. Will wrapped his arms around her, holding his sister close to his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, welcoming the hug. I won't, okay? I won't, he whispered. I'm sorry for putting you through that. Kayla sniffed before pulling back. Will could see the tear tracks running down her cheeks, but she quickly wiped them away. She tried to act tough, but Will knew how strongly her emotions impacted her. Now I want you to listen to your doctor and get some sleep. You need to eat healthy. I need my big brother back, Kayla pleaded. I'm okay, but Nico needs me. He doesn't have anyone. Nico tried to convince her again. And I almost didn't have you, she said. She turned away, hiding her tears, and fiddled with the IV. I had a feeling you were going to fight me on this, so I apologized. Will's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. She turned back around that, and that's when he saw the syringe in her hand. It was one of the sedatives. Will pulled back before realizing it was empty. He then felt a wave of exhaustion pass over him. Kayla had already injected it into his IV. He started falling back on the bed. Kayla's tear-stained face, the last thing he saw before his eyes slid shut. Kayla was keeping Will cooped up in his cabin, saying he needed to rest. He finally understood why Nico hated the infirmary. Every time he had begged Kayla to let him go see Nico, she had said no. When he had escaped from the watchful eye of another one of his siblings to go to the infirmary, Kayla had stopped him at the door, sending him back to the cabin. So Will did what any teenager would do. He snuck out. It was past midnight. Kayla had finally decided to take the night off from the infirmary, leaving Brandon in charge in her place. Will knew that even though Kayla had probably given Brandon explicit orders to not let Will in, but Will could easily convince him to step aside. He waited to hear the telltale signs of Kayla fading into sleep. He threw his covers off and slipped out the front door, silently closing it. He stepped into the brisk air and jogged to the big house. He ducked inside and made his way to the infirmary doors. He silently opened them, but light spilled into the room, alerting Brandon of his presence. Hey, Kayla said I'm not supposed to let you in here, Brandon said wearily, getting up to block Will's way. As the head healer, I outrank her. I'm allowed in the infirmary, Will said. She said you'd say that, and she told me to get her if you kept trying to get in. Brandon started moving towards the door. Will intercepted him, pointing a finger in his face. You will not go get her. I'm fine, and if I really was that bad, she would be angry that you let me out of your sight. I just want to see Nico. But Brandon was holding his own. No. Brandon. He crossed his arms over his chest. No. Look, I just want to see Nico. He is my patient and my best friend, so I get to make the calls about him and his health. I care about him a lot and need to see if he is okay. He shouted as he pushed past Brandon. Brandon made a noise of protest, but Will turned back to him. Also, Kayla hasn't had a decent night's sleep in the past week, so waking up her would be detrimental to you. Brandon looked confused. What do you mean? Will smiled, shaking his head. Kayla does not like being woken up. He will face her wrath for doing so. Brandon's face looked terrified at the thought, so he sat back down. Will turned back around, folding, heading back down to the infirmary. He opened the door of the room Nico was in last time. Sure enough, there was the son of Hades, sprawled across the cot. Will guessed that he hadn't woken up since he had been brought here. Will smirked as he noticed that Nico was wearing a hospital gown, a sign that Will didn't heal him, as Will wouldn't have forced him to wear it, knowing how much Nico despised them. Will walked over to Nico, taking his hand. It felt cold. He took Nico's pulse. It was steady, but slow as Nico was deep in sleep. He turned Nico's wrist over. No new scars along his wrist. Thankfully, He peeled open the hospital gown to fully examine Nico. The gaping wound that was present when he had first Nico was gone, just a scar in its place. Will ran his fingers along it, confounded. How did a wound like that just disappear? He knew that the blessing of Apollo was powerful, but was it really that powerful to leave almost no trace of an injury? No wonder Will had been out for days. His eyes wandered down to the boy's thighs. No! New cuts had appeared since the last time Will had checked. Nico was cutting again. Will cursed himself mentally for not keeping a closer eye on Nico. He should have realized that Nico had been having nightmares. He should have realized sooner that Nico had been shadow traveling. Will shuddered as he felt a cold shiver down his spine. He put his hand against his own forehead. He could feel fever hot against his hand. His head suddenly felt so heavy. He sat in the chair by the bed. He let his head fall into his pillow next to Nico's. He then drifted into sleep. Sorry, guys. Kayla's point of view. William Solace was the first thing the campers at Camp Half-Blood heard in the morning. Kayla should have felt bad about waking the entire camp, but she did not. All she felt was rage at her idiot half-brother. He was being a filthy little hypocrite. All his complaining about his patients, Red Nico, left their beds, and now he was the culprit. When I get my hand on him, she thought murderously. She stormed across the campgrounds and slammed the big house doors open, causing a picture to fall off the wall. She trudged to the infirmary and slammed the door open in there, causing Brandon to jump. His face turned into one of panic. Oh shit. Oh shit is right, Kayla's eyes flashed as she stalked past her half-brother. She walked to Nico's room, ready to start yelling at Will. She opened the door and was stopped mid-yell. Will's head was on the pillow next to Nico's, and their hands were laced together. Kayla's anger melted away at the sight. Looking closer, she saw that Will was shaking. Her eyebrows knelt. She carefully put her head against his forehead. He was burning up. You lovesick idiot, she tutted, grabbing a towel. She wiped the sweat off his forehead. She wrapped him in a blanket and quietly closed the door, leaving the two boys to sleep. Nico's point of view. Bryce, Lawrence, and Octavian plagued Nico's dreams. Their faces burned on his eyelids. As he started to wake up, his eyes shot open. His heart was racing. He felt himself losing his form as the shadows from his dreams tried to claim him. He was shaking after experiencing Bryce's death again. All my fault, all my fault, all my fault. He forced these thoughts away as he tried to gain back his solid state. He breathed deeply. He moved his hand to grab something solid, and his fingers laced with another hand. He looked over and, surprised to find a blonde mop of hair in his face. Will Solace, whose hand he was holding at the moment. He blushed. As he thought about Will and the way Will made him feel, he gained his form back. If Will was here, that meant he was in the infirmary. He guessed Will had saved him after he had gotten stabbed by the Cyclops. He looked down at himself, flushing when he found himself in a hospital gown. He pulled it back to see the wound left by the Cyclops sword, only to find the skin unscathed. What? How is that possible? He tried to think of some explanation as sleep claimed him again. Chapter 19. Nico's point of view. It had been 5 days since Nico had been stabbed. He'd finally woken fully that morning. Will insisted looking over him one last time before he would release him. Instead of examining him, Will was currently interrogating him, his arms over his chest and foot tapping impatiently. What happened? Nico shrugged. Nothing. Will scoffed. Let's try again. What happened? Doing something for my father, Nico lied. I don't believe you. You say that every time, Will pointed out. Nico had no response to Will's good point. Will continued. Even if that was true, why would your father put you in such dangerous situations? Is he trying to kill you so you can always serve him? No, Nico claimed, though he wouldn't put it past his father to do something like that. Then are you purposely trying to find monsters? Are you trying to get yourself killed? Of course not, Nico asserted. Then what? Will asked. I was doing something important. What was so important that you would risk your life for it? Will asked. Nico looked down at the floor again. He couldn't tell Will that he'd been looking for Leo. Nico mentally cursed himself for getting hurt. He had lost valuable time in searching for Leo. Well, he had forgotten to answer Will. He simply shrugged and muttered, I can't tell you. Will sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. Nico, you almost died. You were stabbed, and you've also been shadow traveling. Don't try to deny it. Darkness has surrounded you. I should have intervened sooner. What have you been doing? Nico refused to answer. The silence stretched out before Will broke it. Just be more careful, Nico. I really hate to see you hurt. Just be careful, more careful, Nico. I really hate to see you hurt. The statement sparked Nico's curiosity. How did you manage to make the wound completely disappear? There's only a scar left. Nico watched Will's walls go up as if reluctant to talk about it. I don't exactly know. Interesting. An awkward silence fell over the two boys. Nico cleared his throat, moving to get up. Can I go now? Yes, I suppose, but take it easy. Nico jumped off the bed and walked towards the door. Will's voice followed him. I saw the cuts on your thighs. Nico's face flushed. He felt ashamed of himself. No shadow traveling at all the rest of this week. Go get some sleep in your cabin. Nico was dismissed. He strolled across the camp where daylight was fading, onto his cabin steps where Jason was waiting. His head shot up as he saw Nico approach. Nico, how are you? Nico shrugged and tried to go inside, but Jason prevented him. Are you really okay? From what I heard, you were on your deathbed. I'm fine, Jason. Jason let out a small laugh. Yeah, right. That's why you've been unconscious for days, huh? Because you are fine. How did you get injured anyway? I asked Will, but he said he didn't know. I was running errands for my father, Nico echoed the same line he just told to Will. He had to maintain consistency. I don't believe that. Well, I was doing something important now. Get off my back. Stop acting like Will. Jason looked at him severely. You should be nicer to Will. He saved your life, and from what I heard, he almost killed himself doing so. The words seemed to stop. What? Yeah, you didn't know? Apparently he got the blessing of Apollo when he saved you, causing all your injuries to fade away. From what the Apollo cabin told me, he almost drained his own life force saving you. Nico tuned Jason out and forced his way into his cabin. He slammed the door shut and slid down, and he couldn't believe what he had just heard. What, almost died saving him? He could hear Jason knocking at the door, but he ignored him. He ran to the bed and buried himself in the sheets. Another person had almost died because of him. What kind of person did that make Nico? Nico certainly wasn't worth people hurting themselves to try and save him. Will's point of view. It was 10 o'clock before Will had finally gotten away from the infirmary. He headed straight to Nico's cabin with a bag of his overnight things. He honestly didn't trust the boy not to travel again, and also because his habits had started up again. Will wanted to watch over Nico. With permission from Chiron, he was allowed to sleep in the Hades cabin for the time being to keep an eye on Nico. Will arrived at the Hades cabin. During his nights watching over Nico, he had made a copy of the key to Nico's cabin so that Nico wouldn't be able to lock himself up if he was hurting himself. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. Hearing the door unlock, he opened it and slid it into the dark room. It was silent in the cabin. Moonlight spilled into the room, illuminating Nico's face. His face and body were tense from what Will guessed his nightmares. Will sighed softly. Nico was broken, and Will wanted to fix that. He brushed the hair out of Nico's eyes, and Nico nuzzled into his hand. Will's heart fluttered, and he continued to tangle his hair in Nico's hair. The son of Hades visibly relaxed as Will brought him comfort. He settled more deeply into his pillows and had a peaceful look on his face. One of that, his last name suggested, an angel. Will's hand dropped back to his side. He ran his fingers through his own hair, wondering what he was going to do about Nico. He glanced around the room for any visible blades and spotted one on the dresser. He palmed that and hid it in his bag. When he searched the room, not finding any other blades, he decided to get ready for bed. He walked into the bathroom, closing the door. He brushed his teeth and changed into pajamas. He had already showered, so he didn't do that. He exited the bathroom, flicking off the light, and made his way to an open bunk. He pushed his way under the covers and tried to relax into sleep. Somehow, with thoughts racing around in his mind, sleep finally overtook him. A muffled scream woke Will. His eyes flew open and latched immediately on Nico D'Angelo, whose mouth the scream was issuing from. He moved to wake Nico up, but he had already woken up when he was taking gasping breaths. Nico got up and stumbled to his dresser, feeling for his razor. He became agitated when he couldn't find it. Pulling open one of the drawers and revealing a hidden one, he stumbled past Will without seeing him in the bathroom. Will decided it was time to intervene. He sprang after Nico into the bathroom. As Nico was just about to draw the blade across his skin, Will lurched himself forward. Nico looked up in shock, and Will grabbed his arm to try and make him release the blade. Nico must have still been his nightmare because he began fighting Will off. The two boys struggled for a bit before Will eventually got hold of the razor. He took it and with one hand still fending off Nico, dropped it into the toilet, flushing it away. Nico screamed, "No!" and all the fight seemed to collapse out of him. He laid huddled on the ground. Will sat back up and gathered Nico into his arms. Nico whimpered, but soon lashed himself onto Will's shirt, crying into it. Will rubbed his back soothingly. Nico stayed like that for about half an hour before finally lifting his head up. He gained eye contact with Will, and his eyebrows furrowed as he realized what has just happened. He tried to pull away, an ashamed look coming across his face, but Will needed to reassure him. You don't need to feel ashamed. You went through a hard time, and it's normal to feel scared. Nico's eyes looked wary, but he stopped trying to move away. What are you doing here, Will? His voice was so quiet that if Will hadn't been a foot away from him, he wouldn't have heard him. I came to stay with you to make sure you don't have any nightmares and you don't hurt yourself. Nico glanced up, his eyes panicking, but he quickly wiped that away and replaced it with an expression of exasperation. Well, you don't need to stay here with me. I don't need help. I know it's hard for you to hear, but you do need help, Will said softly. Nico looked to the floor again, so Will put his fingers under Nico's chin and pushed it up so he could see Nico's face. His eyes were shut tightly. Nico, look at me. His eyes slid open. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We all need help sometimes. Like me, I'm a son of Apollo, and I can't even shoot an arrow. I need Chiron to wrap his arms around me and show me how to hold it. Do you know how mortifying that is? A ghost of a smile worked its way onto Nico's face, only to be wiped away again. Nico was trying to suppress his emotions. Will sighed, his fingers still positioned under Nico's chin. He continued, why don't you tell me what your nightmare was about? At that, Nico tore his chin from Will's grasp and continued to stare at the tiles. It was nothing. Will fought the urge to laugh. Don't lie, Nico. It was obviously not nothing because you tried to hurt yourself. Why do you even care? Nico's voice sounded raw with emotion. Will tried to brush the hair from Nico's eyes, but he flinched back. Because you are my friend. And Nico spluttered at the word. Will guessed because he hadn't heard it very often. The two boys lapsed into silence until Will spoke again. Well, you cannot keep having these memories repressed, acting like they don't exist, because they are tormenting you. What do you suggest I do then? Take a swim in the lake? Nico asked, because I am desperate for all this to stop. Erasing your memory isn't the answer. It will fundamentally change you, Will pointed out. I was already fundamentally changed by my experiences, Nico said, closing his eyes and leaning his head back on the sink. The damage. It's already done. It's irreversible. His broken words sent a wave of sadness over Will. He brought his hand up, lightly touching Nico's face. He flinched a little, but did not move away, so Will took that as permission. He put his hand on Nico's cheek, wiping away the singular tear that he had forced himself out. Is it not irreversible? Nico's eyes popped out, seeking Will's. Then how? How do I reverse the damage? You have to stop repressing it, Will stated. Nico pulled himself away from Will. He got up and exited the bathroom. He was pacing around his cabin by the time Will had gotten up. Nico paused for a moment in his pacing, eyes locking upon Will as he approached him. If I stop repressing it for a single moment, let those feelings, those memories I've been hiding away come out. His eyes looked haunted as they dropped from Will to something beyond him. It will destroy me. Will started, but Nico started pacing again. No, you don't get it. What you see. He stopped again, pointing to the bathroom. What have you seen me to do to myself? What have you seen me do to myself? That is the only result of a fraction of the memories getting through, because the only time they get me is in dreams and nightmares. Then that's when my defenses are down. That's when the self-loathing and the terrible things I have seen, I have experienced, I have done. That's when it finds me. Nico pulls up his sleeve, showing off his faint scars, and you've seen what happens when it does. He pulled down his sleeve again, walking away from Will. Will could pick up on his agitation. He had to figure out a way to calm him down. There are ways to control your dreams, ways to prevent your past from bleeding through. I know that, of course. I know that. I used to be able to do that, but now there's too much damage. I don't have the mental capacity to do that, Nico explained, running his hands through his head as if willing his brain to cooperate. I used to do that, control my nightmares from the labyrinth, but that's when I was dealing with one trauma, not 100. All of a sudden, Nico let out a short yell before appending the trunk at the end of the bed, spilling his belongings all over the floor. He lowered himself to the ground, energy spent, leaning back on his bed frame. I can't do this on my own, he whispered, hanging his head down. Will was quiet for a moment, trying to let the son of Hades' anger ebb before approaching. He crossed the room and sat down next to Nico, leaning against the bed as well. Let me help you, he requested. How? Nico's voice cracked on the single word. Head still hung. If you can find a way to control the dreams, then they won't surprise you. If you are able to control how much of your past that you deal with within a day rather than being a lottery in dreams, then it will be easier to handle, Will said. Maybe, Nico admitted. Then let's try that. Take sleeping draughts that are designed to keep away bad dreams. You've had one in the past and it worked, Will reminded. That doesn't change the fact that trauma has happened. No, but it gives you control over it, Will said. Nico looked slowly up at him. You stop the nightmares that attack when you are sleeping, when you are defenseless, then and then and then tackle them during the day. Nico scoffed. How could someone tackle memories? You have to stop repressing them. Nico's eyes flashed with fear, so Will continued. I've been doing some research, and it's good to face your trauma. You can do that in different ways. Talking about it or writing about it. Are you going to make me talk to you? Will considered this for a moment. While Nico confiding in him would make it easier to treat him and help him, Will understood how much of an invasion of privacy that would be. No, it's your private business. You can talk to whoever you want, whether it's me or Percy or an Annabeth. Nico's eyes flashed. Or no one. You could just write about it, whatever feels most comfortable. And that's what this is about. What makes you feel comfortable and safe. You make me feel safe, Nico muttered, looking to the ground again. Will's heart swelled at his words. It was the first compliment he had ever been given by the son of Hades. And it was the highest praise he had ever gotten, that Nico felt safe around him. That was all that Will ever wanted. Nico looked at him with guilt flooding his eyes. I just want to say that all the stuff I said to you a couple of weeks ago about you not being a good healer, I didn't mean it. I was trying to hurt you, to get you to leave me alone, but I went too far, and it didn't work anyway, and it's not true at all. Will felt the surge of sadness and guilt, but Nico had been right. He wasn't a good healer. He'd let so many people die under his care. He looked to the floor, and it wasn't Nico's turn to force his chin up. So he was looking into Nico's eyes. Sincerity flooded from the depths of Nico's honest eyes. I'm being serious. You are a good healer, and no one who died under you, and anyone who died under you, that wasn't your fault. It was just their time to go. Will looked at Nico incredulously. How did he know that that's what I was thinking about? I knew because of the look you got on your face, the guilt and sadness. One must have said that last bit out loud. And I saw the scars on your wrist. Will looked down at his hand and tugged his cord bracelets down them as to hide his scars. Nico stopped him and removed the bracelets, exposing the thin, barely visible scars that lined Will's wrist. It wasn't as bad as Nico's, but they were still there. Every time Will had lost a person that he was supposed to be healing, he added another scar. But they were so light, Will had hidden them well, that no one ever saw them except for Nico. Nico was examining his wrist. I noticed these ones in the infirmary. He looked back into Nico's eyes. He suddenly felt the overwhelming urge to get something off his chest. They are for each of the patients I've lost. I knew I shouldn't do it, but the guilt. He let that hang in the air before continuing. I let them down. I let them die. I should have worked harder, spent more hours in the infirmary. Their deaths weighed down on me every day, and they reminded me that I am not good enough. He tried to stand, but Nico dragged him back down. His hands lashed onto each one of Will's arms. Listen to me. Will tried to interrupt and get up again, but Nico locked a tight grip on him. I said, listen to me. This shocked Will into silence. We're plenty good enough. You have lost some people, but so had every demigod that has ever existed. Every demigod has someone on their record that they felt was their fault that they died, and you being a healer has more than most people, but none of those deaths were your fault. You did everything you could. But my dad just decided it was their time to go. I'm a son of Apollo, Will sobbed. I should have saved. It's my fault. It's not your fault, and I bet you that's what they would say. And just think of how many people you've saved, including me. Silence filled the room, only disturbed by the sobs lessening from Will. Nico looked like he was debating something. Then his eyes cleared, as if he made a decision. How about this? Since you've taken care of me, you let me take care of you. How about when I'm healthy enough, I go to the underworld and talk to your lost patients. I could ask them how they are, and if they blame you. Will felt touched. You would do that for me? Nico nodded. I would do anything for you. You saved my life. Nico reached down and grabbed Will's exposed wrist. He gently brought it up and placed a gentle kiss on it. His next words were spoken against Will's wrist. Now let me save you. Will shuddered. Nico gently placed his hand back on his lap and took his hand over Will's arm. Will lurched forward, bringing Nico into a hug. Nico tensed, but then relaxed into it. Bringing his arms around Will, he eventually broke off the hug. He stood, offering a hand to Nico. Nico accepted it, and Will pulled him to his feet. "Come on, let's get some sleep." Nico looked reluctant. "Will you stay with me?" Nico said quietly. Will smiled and said, "No place I'd rather be." Nico crawled back into his bed, and Will sat upright next to him and his back against the headboard. Nico struggled to get comfortable. He eventually settled down, but his breathing showed Will that he wasn't asleep. He brought his hand to Nico's back and began drawing shapes into it. He softly began humming, and Nico slowly fell into a deep sleep. Will moved to go back to his bunk, but sleep claimed him before he could move. Sorry, guys. Sorry that I'm getting a little bit emotional. I did cry on purpose for a part of it when Will was getting emotional, just to bring it more into character. But then I really did cry when Nico and Will were getting really emotional. I also need some water. This is getting exhausting. Nico's point of view. Nico woke up, feeling safer than before. He wanted to go back to bed and start snuggling back into his pillow. Only then did he realize that it wasn't a pillow. He opened his eyes to find his head was on a Camp Half-Blood shirt, and under that he could feel a muscular chest. He looked up and found himself trapped in Will Solace's blue orbs. Will smiled at him. "Good morning." Nico smiled and mumbled a response back into Will's chest. He merely settled more comfortably onto Will's chest. He then realized what he was doing. His eyes shot open, and he struggled away from the son of Apollo. And he accidentally fell off the bed. He hit the ground hard. "Nico!" he heard Will call. He put his knees on either side of Nico's body. "Are you okay?" Nico nodded and regretted it. His head was pounding. He stayed on the floor with Will hovering above him for about 10 minutes as the pain started to recede. He opened his eyes and found that his vision was not laced with black. He prodded himself and saw that the position he and Will had taken, if someone were to walk in, Will and Nico would look very compromising, and because the face loved to screw with Nico. Walk in, someone did. The cabin door flew open and a figure outlined in the sunlight. "Hey, Nico, are you awake?" "Oh my gosh." Jason's face was a mixture of horror and shock. He then flushed a deep breath. I'll just leave you guys alone." He quickly closed the door. Nico groaned and quickly got to his feet. He pushed the cabin door and followed after Jason. "Jason, wait! That wasn't what you thought it was!" Jason stopped. He turned to face Nico, his face still red with embarrassment. What it looked like is that Will was there for more than just watching you. Jason's face took a turn as he tried to put his hand on Nico's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Nico shrugged his hand off. "Did he try to take advantage of you?" "Oh my gosh, no!" "Because I swear, if he did." "Jason, will you listen to me?" Jason lapsed into silence. "I fell, and Will was just making sure I was okay." The son of Jupiter still looked wary. "Are you sure you weren't lying to me?" Jason asked. "Jason, I'm fine. My dignity is intact or whatever. He was just making sure I was okay." Jason said nothing in response to Nico, so Nico rolled his eyes, turning around. "I'm getting changed." "I'm coming with you," Jason added. The two boys headed back to the Hades cabin. Nico saw that Will was standing on the front porch, his hand behind his back, scratching it nervously. "Hey, Jason, that wasn't what he cut off by," Jason holding a hand up. "If you ever try to take advantage of him," "Jason!" Nico's face was reddening. "Or hurt him, I will end you," Jason threatened. "Nothing happened," Nico glared at Jason. Nico looked a little apprehensive at the son of Jupiter, but Jason merely looked away from him and towards Nico, smiling cheerfully. "So, you ready for breakfast?" Jason's such an idiot. The next week passed almost without great incident. Nico trained all day and built his strength up so he could start searching for Leo and Calypso again. Although Will hadn't brought it up again, no doubt wanting to avoid upsetting Nico, the son of Hades had considered the healer's proposition. Instead of getting a notebook, however, he had purchased a sketchbook from the camp store. He thought that writing his experiences would be too painful, so he decided to sketch them instead. Nico found that he was a relatively good artist. Using only his memory, he began sketching the images that plagued his mind. While Will stayed with him in the Hades cabin at night, giving him the promised sleeping draughts, nightmares still bled through. After Will would calm him down and prevent him from hurting himself, Nico would get his sketchbook and draw out what he had seen. Will had noticed this, but was true to his word, giving the son of Hades space. The sleeping potions did help, so Nico wasn't always terrified when he woke up. He actually started talking to Will about the basics of what happened to him. Nico had grown to trust the healer. His feelings began to bloom for Will as well, though he kept that under the radar because he still didn't know how Will felt about him. Nico was thinking about the set of Apollo during lunch that afternoon. It started as a normal day at camp. Jason and Percy were fighting over who was more powerful. The whole day and the previous night, Jason and Percy had been using their powers against the other. Jason had been doused with water more time than he cared to admit, and Percy's clothing was singed. Nico had to admit it was childish, but it was fun to watch. Percy had sat down, talking to him about how he's more attractive than Jason. Nico tried to tune this out, thinking about a different blonde that he found attractive, when a flash of lightning hit the bench, inches away from Nico. Without warning, Nico was taken back into a memory. He was chasing Bianca around a catch in a luxury hotel. He noticed his father gesturing wildly to explain something to his mother. His mother got up to walk away, but he was too intent on chasing his sister to care. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He stopped, and so did Bianca. The smell of ozone in the air, and his father screamed no as he launched towards him and Bianca, encasing them in a black wall of energy. Nico shielded his eyes with his arms as a bright light filled up the room, and a blast rocked the building. When the light had stopped, the debris settled. Nico looked up to find that there was a circle around him, and Bianca where none of the debris had fallen in. He noticed that his father was off in the distance, holding something in his arms. He and Bianca inched forward to see what it was. He felt himself gasp as he realized who it was. It was his mama. He felt a sob building in his throat. He tore himself out of the memory to find that no time had passed. Percy stood up, looking off in the distance, yelling something, but it was muted. Nico was breathing heavily, his ears ringing as if he'd been exposed to an explosion. He turned away from the table. Jason was running up to him, but he was in slow motion. Nico started shaking as he realized what had happened. It was the first memory he had gained back after being dipped in the leaf when he was a child. Zeus had tried to kill him. He looked up to find Percy's face tight with alarm. His lips were moving into a word Nico recognized Will. Jason's face suddenly loomed in front of Nico. Suddenly, he was a little kid again, and Zeus was coming to get him. A hand touched his shoulder, but Nico wrenched it away. No, nobody was going to get him. Go away, he screamed. There was another hand on his shoulder, and Nico's body acted of its own accord, taking cues from his panic and set dark energy from him through the person touching him. They were thrown back. He crouched down in his hands. He tried to block out the memories, to rip them from his head. He tried to control his breathing, but it wasn't working. Suddenly, there were hands pulling his. Will Solace's face showed up in front of him. He was saying something to Nico, who couldn't hear him, but it didn't matter because Will's presence was all he needed. He calmed Nico down. Memories started to fade as he came out of his panic attack. The voices telling him that he should have died in that attack from Zeus faded and was just background noise. Will's voice finally broke through. Nico, it's okay, just focus on my voice. Will brought his hand up to Nico's shoulder. Nico saw red on it. He grabbed Will's arm before he could touch him and turned it over. Will was gushing from a scrape along his arm, one that hadn't been there earlier. Will took his arm back. Nico, it's fine, I'm fine. That's when Nico realized that Will had been the one to put his hand on his shoulder. Nico had set his dark energy, had thrown him off. He had hurt Will. How could he hurt Will? He started breathing heavily again, guilt flooding through him. I hurt you, Nico whispered, looking at his hands. Nico, look at me. You didn't hurt me. I'm fine. He went to put his hands onto Nico, but Nico flinched back. He got to his feet, and Will got up too. He held his hand out, trying to show Nico that he wasn't going to hurt him. Nico made the decision to run, and Will saw that on his face. He reached out, saying no, but Nico was already gone. The crowd that surrounded the two boys parted as Nico ran through. He sprinted across the camp lawn, tears threatening his eyes. He ran to his cabin and slammed against the door, fumbling with the knob. For some reason, it wasn't opening. Nico started to panic and tried harder to get inside. Using his shoulder, he forced the door open and shut it behind him. He grabbed a hidden blade. He wanted to hurt himself. He wanted to feel the blade tear into his skin. But he knew if he did, Will would be disappointed. He started pacing, trying to decide what to do. He looked for a sketchbook and flipped it open on his bunk. He sat on the floor and started sketching the hotel debris as he remembered it. He heard pounding on the door. He gripped the blade more tightly. Go away! His voice sounded raw with grief. He heard the door swing slowly open. "No!" he yelled, he yelled, throwing his head in his arms so whoever was coming in wouldn't see him like this. "Leave me alone!" He felt a presence standing behind him. Will's voice filled the room. "Nico, are you okay?" He felt Will crouched down next to him. Will knew better than to touch him in a time like this. "Leave me alone," Nico said to his arms. "We just want to make sure you're okay." "We?" Nico thought. He raised his head a little and turned to see that Percy and Jason had come in with Will. Both of their faces were lined with worry. Nico buried his face back into his arms. Will's voice broke through again. "Can I see your sketchbook? Then maybe we can talk about what happened." Nico didn't say anything, which Will took as a response. He slid the book out of Nico's arms, took at it. He dropped, exposing a different page. Percy gasped. "Is that where I think it is?" "Nico, is that?" Nico looked up and saw Percy's horrified face. He nodded slowly. Percy took the sketchbook and began flipping through the pages. They were filled with images of Tartarus. What might have been meaningless landscapes to Will and Jason was recognized by Percy. He knew every part of Tartarus, just like Nico. When images of whoever hut showed up, Percy let the book fall from his hands. When an image of Damien's hut showed up, Percy let the book fall from his hands. He sat down on the floor, putting his head in his hands. "You see it every night, too, don't you, Percy?" Nico asked, and Percy nodded. "I don't think I would ever see that place besides the memories, but what you drew, that is Tartarus." The word hung in the air, and Jason put his hand on Percy's shoulder. They all stayed silent for a few moments before Will broke it. "What happened, Nico? What did you see?" Nico shook his head and pointed to the sketchbook. Will picked it up and sat beside Nico. He flipped to the most recent page and looked at it. He couldn't figure out what it was. Percy, who had emerged from his hands, made a noise of recognition. He slid over to Will's other side, looking at the page. "Is that the hotel?" Nico looked at Percy warily. "How did you know about that?" Percy looked sheepish. A while back I had a dream, and I watched as your father showed you this vision, but why did you react to the way you did? You've seen this before." "I experienced a memory." Percy looked confused. "My memories were wiped and the Leith are starting to come back, and I relived that experience." Percy looked at Nico in sorrow. Will and Jason looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "A memory got triggered for Nico." "But why by lightning?" Nico nodded at Jason's question. "What happened?" Will asked. Percy moved to explain. "No," Nico interrupted. "We need to know what happened," Will informed. Nico sighed, regretting what he was about to do. "I'll tell you." Will looked shocked, and for good reason. Nico had rarely talked about any of his flashbacks or nightmares. This was a big step for Nightmare. Not only was he opening up to Will, but also to Jason and Percy. All three boys stood up straighter as Nico began explaining what happened. All three demigods sat in silence, absorbing Nico's words. And their faces changed from confusion to alarm to sorrow and horror. When he was finished speaking, Jason looked murderous. "My father did this to you? He killed your mother?" Nico nodded sadly. Will noticed and grabbed his hand. Jason noticed and looked at Nico's hands. "Nico, is that blood?" He looked down at the hand that was still gripping the knife. He had forgotten he was holding it and had gripped it tightly for his entire story. He opened his palm, revealing the blade. Will sucked in a breath and plucked the blade out of Nico's hand, giving Nico a disappointed and sad look. He got up and started to the bathroom to get a bandage. Nico scrambled after him. "No, wait, Will, I didn't mean to." He stepped in front of Will. "I really didn't mean to. It was an accident." But Will had sidestepped him, walking to the bathroom. Will didn't believe him. He returned with rubbing alcohol on a white bandage. He wouldn't meet Nico's eyes. As he sat him on the bed and got on his knees in front of him, Nico hissed as the alcohol stung his skin, but Will didn't apologize like he usually did. He wrapped the bandage tightly around Nico's hand and scrubbed the rest of the blood away. He got up to store his stuff and emerged, still not meeting Nico's eyes. "It was an accident," but Will cut Nico off, his eyes finally looking up. Nico saw they were laced with disappointment. "I thought we agreed that you wouldn't do that anymore. You said that you wouldn't." Will's voice was rising and falling with emotion. "I didn't mean to. If you wanted to hurt yourself, you should have waited for me so I could help you not to." Will's eyes were flashing with guilt, as if he thought it was his fault that Nico had hurt himself. "I didn't mean, but you did. You cut yourself, and you've been so good. I thought I had helped you. What possessed you to hurt your..." Anger flared inside Nico. It was an accident, but when I got back in here and realized I had hurt you, I wanted to hurt myself because I hurt you. He'll bit his lip. It was an accident. I still caused you harm, Will. That's why I wanted to hurt myself. Nico, you don't need to hurt yourself because of you accidentally hurting me. The only thing that really hurts is that you want to hurt yourself because of me. Nico walked away from Will, leaving the scent of Apollo's hand hovering in midair. Well, that makes me feel loads better. Nico, he moved to get to the other side of Nico so he could see his face. No, Nico whipped around. I don't need you. I don't want to cause you pain anymore. So you can just leave. Will didn't budge. Nico looked around the room. Jason and Percy were still there. Percy didn't know about his self-harm. All of you, get out! Nico, we aren't leaving, Will said. This launched Nico into action. Fine. He grabbed his sword and his already packed backpack. He had been planning to search for Leo that night. I'll leave then. Maybe then I won't cause you as much harm. He backed into the shadow-filled corner of the room. If I'm gone, you won't have to worry about me anymore. Will's face dropped into one of horror as he realized what Nico was about to do. He reached out to Nico, screaming, Nico! But Nico had already been whisked away. Oh man, that was deep. Now, I know I said chapters 16 through 20, but I'm really getting into this, so I'm going to keep reading. I'll just probably read the next chapter, so I don't know. Chapter 21, Nico's point of view. Nico pulled himself from the shadows. It had been 3 days since escaping from Camp Half-Blood, and he had spent a majority of it in the underworld. He gasped as he tried to get his breathing under control. He looked around. He realized that he was in Central Park, daylight bleeding into the sky. Not where he intended to go, but anything was better than camp at the moment. He didn't need to go back there. It was clear that he didn't belong, and all he did was cause people harm. He would return Leo to camp and then go off on his own, where he belonged. He strolled through the park, and nobody seemed to think that it was strange that he was a teenager carrying a huge sword. Thank goodness for the miss. He got out of the park to avoid any monsters. He walked into the city, dodging pedestrians and taxis. He ducked into a coffee shop and slid into an empty booth. A waitress came up and asked him what he wanted. He merely said black coffee, and she smiled and said she would be right back. Nico watched her leave and then looked back to the booth. He barely prevented himself from jumping when he saw the figure was sitting across from him. Hello, Ghost King, the man said. Looking more closely, Nico saw that it was a ghost, one of the ones who had helped him pin down Leo's location in Canada when he had been there. Hello again. Have any more information about Leo Valdez? The ghost grinned and looked down at his fingers. What? That depends. What are you offering? Nico slid his sword on the table. How about I let you leave here without using this? The ghost looked alarmed at the blade as he knew what it could do. Of course. Anything you say. He sounded terrified. Nico smiled, pleased that the ghost had understood its place. Now, do you have any information regarding Leo Valdez? The waitress reappeared with Nico's coffee. She had put it on the table, and Nico wrapped his hands around it. Yes. From my sources, he is currently in New York, at an island called Coney. The ghost offer informed. Nico thought about this. Of course. Leo would think it would be a good idea to take his girlfriend, who hadn't seen the world for eons, to an amusement park. His inner musings were interrupted by an iris message appearing before him. Hazel's face popped up, and before her face broke into a smile upon seeing Nico's face. Nico, how are you? She looked at her surroundings. Where are you? Nico was surprised to see her. Hazel, how did you get the call through? You didn't know my location, he said wearily. It was necessary to know where someone was before calling them. Hazel waved his question off. There was this girl named Fleecy who worked with Iris, and she said she'd connect us with us at any time. Anywhere. Where are you? That's not Camp Half-Blood. I'm in the city right now, he said, to give her that information to quench her questions, but nothing more specific in case Will went snooping and asked Hazel if he'd seen Nico. It didn't matter that much, though. Nico would be gone within the hour. Are you with anyone? Nico looked across the table at the present ghost who waved at Nico. He disappeared into the air. No, I'm alone. Why are you in the city? Nico evaded the question. Why are you calling exactly? Not that it isn't great to see you, but why? We hadn't talked in a while, and I couldn't fall back to sleep. I mean, it is 4 a.m. here, so I wanted to see how my brother was. Why are you avoiding my question? Are you in trouble? No, of course not. I just snuck out of camp because I needed a break, that's all. Without permission, and at this time in the morning, Hazel, it's fine. I can take care of myself, Nico said, exasperated. Not the past couple of weeks. That struck a nerve. Hazel, he said, and with a warning tone in his voice. Just trying to look out for you, Nico. How's Camp Jupiter? He asked. Hazel must have understood that he wasn't going to answer her questions because she dropped the topic. She launched into a crazy description of the events of the past few weeks at the Roma camp. As she was telling him the story about Hannibal being in love with Frank when he had accidentally turned into an elephant, she was interrupted by her door slamming. She and Nico both jumped, and Raina came into Hazel's room. Nico could see her on the outline of the iris meshes, and she couldn't see him as she was too distracted by what she had to tell Hazel. Centurion, pack your things. We're going to Camp Half-Blood. Before Hazel could even ask why, she continued, Nico's been missing for 3 days, and they just decided to tell us about it. At 4 a.m, he was pretty shaken up when he left. He left no trace, and they are concerned that he isn't coming back. Hazel's eyes widened. She looked back at Nico. She pointed the message out to Raina. She hurried to Hazel's side. Nico, where have you been? Where are you? The campers at Camp Half-Blood are looking for. Nico waved a hand through the message, cutting her off. He slapped a 20 on the table to pay for his non-touch coffee. He needed to get going. Hazel knew he was in the city. With his head down, he elbowed his way through the New York streets. He gasped as someone ran into him and fell to the ground. He was about to walk away when he saw who he had knocked down. Mrs. Jackson! He hastily helped her to stand. Of all people in New York, of course he had to run into someone he knew. Are you okay? Yeah, but you look like you're running from something. Are you in trouble? Why aren't you at camp? She was perceptive. Nico gave her that. I'm fine. I was just exploring the city. How about you come to the apartment with me? You can take a break and tell me what's really going on. She blockaded. Nico slowly backed away. No, I have to go. He turned and ran. He ducked to Tally and Sally walked right past him. He watched as she pulled out a cell phone. She dialed the number and held it to her ear. Percy, hi. I know it's early, and I know you told me to call me only for an emergency, but it is one. I saw Nico D'Angelo running down the street. He looked like he was trying to escape from someone. Last thing I saw, he was headed in the direction of Central Park. She pulled the phone away and looked at it. Well, fine. Hang up on me. I'm only your mother. She continued down the street, calling Nico's name. Nico waited until she was out of earshot to take off down the street. He headed towards Central Park. He knew that's where Percy was headed, but the entrance to the underworld was there as well, and he couldn't afford to shadow jump at the time. He entered the park, but stopped dead in his tracks as he felt a shiver down his spine. He whipped around to see Percy melting into existence with Mrs. O'Leary. His face widened in surprise as he saw Nico. Apparently, he didn't believe that he had found the son of Hades so quickly. He slid off the hellhound's back and slowly walked towards Nico. Nico, you've had us so worried. I would say I'm sorry, but that is a lie, Nico snapped. Percy's eyes narrowed, noticing Nico's tone. Why don't you come back to camp and we can talk about it? All I do is cause people harm. I'm not doing that anymore. As he spoke, he failed to notice how close Percy was getting. So just leave me alone. At that, Percy launched himself forward, tackling Nico to the ground. Nico hit the ground hard and choked as the breath was knocked out of him. Percy pinned him down. We just want to help you, Nico. You are hurting yourself, and we want to help. We care about you. Nico was struggling to move. Percy was bigger than him, so the weight was giving him the advantage. But the two boys were also close to the underworld entrance. Nico was in his home turf. He felt a surge power throwing Percy off him, as he had done to Will a couple of days prior. Nico raised his arms up, summoning skeletons to the surface. Oh, so we are doing this now, Percy shouted, referring to the challenge he had mentioned first in the infirmary. He drew Riptide and began slicing the skeletons, but they kept reforming. Percy summoned away from the nearby pond, dousing Nico and his skeletons with water. Nico became enraged, causing more skeletons to break through the surface. There were far too many for Percy to handle. They overpowered him, trying to drag him underground. Nico's vision flashed, and suddenly it was Bryce Lawrence being dragged into the ground by Nico's powers. The memory caused him to stumble back, breaking his concentration. His skeletons crumbled. Percy hauled himself back up from the crevice that had been created in the ground. Breathing heavily, Percy looked up into Nico's eyes. His normally bright eyes were haunted and shattered. Percy was probably remembered being sucked into Tartarus. Percy, Nico started, horrified with himself. It's okay, Percy rushed to reassure. He raised his hand in what he must have thought was a placated gesture, but it only revealed the blood running down his arm. Nico's eyes locked on that. He had hurt another one of his friends with his powers. Not only had he almost injured Percy, he had almost killed him like he had with Bryce Lawrence. Nico stumbled back again. looking down at his arms. What kind of monster was he? He hurt his enemies and friends alike. He felt a wave of self-loathing overcome him. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stifle his powers. "I'm sorry," Nico gasped at Percy. Percy's eyes flashed with alarm. He tried to get up. "It's fine, I'm fine, don't run." But Nico was already out of earshot. He muttered a command, and the rock to the underworld slid open. He slipped inside, the rock blocking out the sunlight. Percy's point of view. Percy was unbelievably worried. He had spent... Did I say Percy's point of view? Anyway, Percy's point of view. Percy was unbelievably worried. He had spent the last 3 days looking for Nico. Once his mother called him, he set off immediately for Central Park. And once he found Nico, the son of Hades had gotten away. Perfect. Percy was embarrassed. He had just been humiliated in a fight against Nico. He also failed to realize his own stupidity in challenging Nico. The son of Hades was defensive and still recovering, and Percy had forced him to rise up energy and exhaust himself. Nico hadn't killed Percy, but he was sure that Will would, for endangering his patient. He was currently pacing back and forth in front of that underworld entrance. He would have just used Mrs. O'Leary to get down to the underworld, but she ran off before Percy could stop her. He had whistled, but to no avail. There was a team of demigods on the way from camp in the van in order to bring Nico back to camp, but Percy had successfully apprehended him. Hopefully, Annabeth would know a way to get into the underworld. He found his girlfriend. She had shared on the second ring. "Do you have him?" "No." "Percy, what happened?" Annabeth admonished. "Well, I found him, but he was trying to run, so he started using our powers against each other. He beat me and escaped into the underworld, which I can't get into because Mrs. O'Leary ran off." Annabeth cursed and explained rapid fire to Will. Percy heard muffled cursing and Annabeth spoke again. "We'll be there in 10 minutes. Maybe we can get into the underworld." With that, she hung up. Percy stowed the phone back into his pocket. He prayed that his phone call wouldn't lure any monsters. He continued pacing until help arrived. Sometimes I think about like Percy and I wonder, how does he live with himself? No offense to Percy, I love him, but sometimes he does some pretty idiotic things. I'm just saying. Now we're back to chapter 22. Now we're on chapter 22. Discovery. Nico's point of view. Mrs. O'Leary was behind him. Nico had whistled to her, realizing that she was a way Percy could get into the underworld, and she had reappeared behind him. Nico had listened to Percy go over what was happening on the phone. When he realized that the other demigods were on their way, Nico decided to seal off the entrance so they wouldn't be able to enter. Dark spots dotted his vision, but he shook them off and made the descent into the underworld. Nico plodded down the narrow stairs, almost slipping a couple of times. He really needed to sleep. Although accustomed to the dark, he could still barely see anything in front of him. He continued down the narrow steps until he finally heard the sound of the Styx. He emerged at the base of a cliff, on black volcanic sand. To his right, the river Styx gushed its toxic waters, while the fires burnt on the ramparts of Erebos to the left. Home, Nico thought drearily. Nico kicked up sand as he made his way towards his father's kingdom. He passed through a kingdom's gates without a problem, some spirits kneeling before him, recognizing he was the Ghost King. He disregarded them and continued through his father's realm. He saw Cerberus, who barked excitedly at the sight of Mrs. O'Leary. They began wrestling with each other, crushing some spirits. A ghost of a smile appeared on Nico's face. At the sight of the hounds, he passed the dogs and through the security gates. The security ghouls acknowledged him as he walked through the fields of Asphodel. He walked, ignoring the lost souls wandering. He finally came upon his father's palace. Nico pushed open the doors to the entrance of the palace. As he walked through the entrance hall, he planned to just slip into the kitchen and eat, then go to his room and sleep for a couple of hours. His plans were foiled when he tried to tiptoe past the throne room. His father's voice boomed out, "Nico!" He straightened and walked into the throne room. Hades was lounging in his throne. His father cleared his throat and Nico kneeled. "What? Are you thinking about coming home without saying hello?" "Is there any reason you called me in here, father?" Nico asked, exasperated. Hades looked surprised at Nico's tone. "Yes, what was that motive for sealing off Orpheus's entrance?" Nico struggled to think of an excuse. "I was being chased by some rogue spirits and just barely escaped them." Nico knew the excuse was feeble, and apparently his father thought so too. He narrowed his eyes. "Rogue spirits? You brought down titans and can't handle rogue spirits? The so-called Ghost King?" That struck a nerve for Nico. No, sir, I've overtaxed myself shadow traveling, so I didn't want to exhaust myself. That should never stopped you before, his father pointed out. Why not just use that one friendly hellhound that always plays with Cerberus so you don't overexert yourself? I didn't think of that, Sir. Nico looked down at his shoes. And since you can't handle these pesky spirits, maybe I should send a group of guards to take them out. I shot up in alarm. No, father. Nico couldn't risk his friends being attacked by underworld guards. If they were sent by his father, his friends wouldn't be able to hold them back. His father smiled coolly. But why not? You said you couldn't handle them. I'm happy to offer my services. They weren't spirits. His father interrupted. I know. I'm god of the underworld. I can see all that happens in my realm. Your deception shows that you are running from your friends and are ashamed. My question is, why? Nico was at a loss for words. I'm waiting. I don't think that is any of your business, Nico stuttered out. Hades' eyes flashed. My realm, my son, my business. Tell me what is happening. Why should I? Nico was too exhausted to care that he was being rude. You've never been for me and just decide to now. I'm trying to, Nico. Anger filled his voice, but the god quickly cooled himself down. If you aren't going to tell me, I'm going to find out this information on my own. Hades flicked his hand and an orb appeared in the center of the room. A scene was playing on it, and Nico realized that it was his friends trying to break into the underworld. Percy and Jason were pushing the rock. After a minute of struggling, Percy spoke. It's no use. I don't think we're going to be able to get down there. Could Hazel shadow travel down? The orb shifted to show Hazel, Raina, Will, and Frank off to the side. Nico's heart jumped when he saw Will. He was leaning over Hazel, checking her pulse. Hazel was on the ground, her head in Frank's lap. Will looked over at Percy's words. She's overtaxed herself jumping here from Camp Jupiter. There's no telling when she will be conscious or ready to jump again. She can't go down there. Frank's eyes were bright with concern. She's supposed to avoid the underworld. Otherwise, Pluto might take her back. There's nothing we can do, Jason muttered. Nico watched as Will stood up and straightened. He was talking under his breath. He walked to the rock and, to everyone's surprise, punched it. Nico winced as he heard the bones break and the loud gasp of his friends. Nico! Why did you have to run? Will breathed against the rock, fighting back tears. He went in for another punch, but Jason pulled him back. Nico stepped closer to the orb, unaware of what he was doing. Will fought against Jason, but Jason managed to pin his arms down. After a minute, Will stopped resisting and clapped onto the floor, kneeling. A sigh went through everyone, and Jason crouched down next to Will. He spoke in a low tone so only Will could hear. Sorry, Will, I know how much he means to you, but he will come back eventually. He just needs some time. Jason stood, his hands on Will's shoulders. I'm so sorry, but there isn't anything we can do right now. Jason walked away to round everyone back onto the van. Will looked up right at Nico. Oh, Nico. He was about to say something else, but Nico had seen enough. He waved his hand through the scene, and the image was disturbed and cut off. He sneaked a glance at his father, who had watched everything unfold. His hands were folded under his chin in concentration. He considered Nico. Why run from them? They seem to care about you a lot, unless that Will character. You are ashamed about how you feel about him? Nico said nothing, which Hades took as an answer. Well, I can tell you that I had flings with men back in my day. Don't mention it to Persephone, but it really is nothing to be ashamed of. Nico interrupted. Please don't. I don't want to know about your past relations, Father, and I really do not want to discuss this matter with you. So if you excuse me, I will be in my room, sir. He added as an afterthought. Hades must have realized he wasn't getting anything out of his son because he dismissed him. Do try and get some rest, Nico. We wouldn't want you to exhaust yourself. Thank you, Father. Is that all? Yes, you're excused. Nico pivoted and walked towards the exit. And Nico, believe me, you really have nothing to be ashamed. His voice was cut off by the loud thud of the doors closing. Nico melted into existence. He looked around to find himself in the middle of Coney Island. He stumbled as he pulled himself out of the shadow. The spirits had called to him again, and he looked at his hands. They were turning wispy. Will had been right. He was too weak to shadow travel. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. He could worry about this form once he completed his mission. After sleeping for a couple of hours, Nico had awoken, eaten some food, and prepared himself to jump. The boardwalk was eerie at night with no tourists in sight. It was quiet. He started along the boardwalk, looking for any evidence of Leo. Suddenly, an excited scream broke through the silence of the night as machinery started up. Nico whipped around to see the ride, called the Cyclone, flight up. He jogged over to the attraction and entered the gates that had already been picked. He walked through the line and made it to the loading point of the ride. He took one look at the control panel and knew that Leo had messed with it. Listening to the excited screams issuing from the cart, he could hear Leo's voice in a very feminine voice telling him he was being childish. Yes, that was Calypso. He leaned back against the railing, crossing his arms as he waited for Leo and Calypso to return. He looked up as the track rattled and the cart pulled into the loading bay. Leo looked just as he did before he left. His eyes were sparkling with excitement and his playful spirit shone through. Calypso, who was sitting next to him, had her arms crossed with an annoyed expression on her face, but Nico saw that her eyes were twinkling with joy. Neither of them noticed Nico as they came to a stop. Nico did tend to blend into the shadows. The bar on their seat came up, and Leo jumped out of it. Woo! That was awesome. Would you care to go again, my fair lady? Calypso rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Leo took that as a yes and mounted over to the control panel. Nico decided to cut in. Having fun? It caused quite a reaction. Leo gasped, spinning around and pulling a hammer from his belt and pointed at Nico. Calypso jumped in, her eyes swiveled to where Nico was standing. Leo, who is Nico? Leo broke out into a huge grin. Oh man, what are you doing here? He went to go in for a hug, but then thought better of it. Looking for you, Nico came off of the railing, looking around. You aren't an easy person to find. Leo had helped Calypso out of the car and put his hand to the back of his neck, looking sheepish. I didn't know anyone was looking for me. Leo, you've been gone for a month. Everyone thinks you're dead. A month? Nico didn't say anything, so Leo went on. But you didn't... I spoke with my father and found out you weren't, Nico said. But you didn't tell anyone? I didn't want to give them false hope. They've all been mourning. Leo smirked. I knew they would miss me, after all. Nico cut him off, anger rising inside him. Leo, they think that you are dead. Everyone is dealing with survivor's guilt because of you. You've been dawdling around the world while your friends are grieving for you. You can't keep letting them think you're dead. Jason lost his best friend. How do you think he's feeling? How dare you let them deal with that survivor's guilt? Nico was breathing heavily with emotion. Although he personally had not been great friends with Leo before he disappeared, he saw how much it had hurt Jason and how much pain it had caused him. Leo was currently processing what Nico had said and was opening and closing his mouth like a fish. He looked shocked to hear Nico speak so passionately. Camp Half-Blood is your home. Those campers are your family. How dare you throw that all away? Now I expect you to be at camp soon. And if I don't, I'm going to make you wish Gia had successfully killed you. Nico turned on his heel, leaving behind a very confused Leo and equally befuddled Calypso. He walked to the hall and melted into the shadows. That's right, Leo. You better do it. Stupid Leo. Anyway. Chapter 23. Returning. Will's point of view. It was 1:30 in the morning. Will was tossing and turning, too distracted by his worry for Nico to sleep. He thought about what happened earlier in the day. The van had arrived in Central Park and found Percy doing everything he could to get into the entrance. Even though it had been Orpheus's door, no amount of music, whether it be by instrument, voice, or a recording from a phone, could open the door. Hazel, Frank, and Rita had arrived. Soon after landing, Hazel had called out. After trying to move the rock by sheer force, Percy and Jason had given up, and Will had punched the rock in frustration, something he was deeply regretting now. The ambrosia had mended the bones, but it still hurt like beyond pain. After another 5 minutes of not falling asleep, he threw the covers off. He carefully pulled on a jacket and silently slipped out of his cabin. He waited until the harpies passed by before sprinting across the lawn to cabin 13 to see if there was any sign of Nico. He creaked the door open. The Greek fire illuminated the empty room as Hazel was sleeping off her shadow, jumping in the infirmary. He scoured the room for any clues where Nico could be and found nothing. He sat down on the bed, head in his hands, worried beyond belief. He laid back, inhaling the fading traces of Nico on the bed. What am I going to do? A yell woke Will. He sat up, wondering who had screamed and where he was. He had fallen asleep in the Hades cabin. He looked around, worriedly to see if Nico had returned when the door opened. Sunlight filtered the room when his eyes adjusted. He saw Nico enter the cabin. He headed to the bathroom, not seeing Will. Will was relieved to see him, but anger and worry Nico had caused him filling his being. He didn't say anything, waiting for Nico to see him. He glanced at his watch. 8 a.m. Nico rummaged around in the bathroom, throwing stuff into his bag. He turned to go back into the cabin and ran his foot into the door. Shit, he muttered, under his breath in pain. Will took this opportunity. Shit is right, Nico's head whipped to look at Will. His head dilated in panic as he realized who it was. Where have you been? Out, Nico shortly answered. What were you thinking, Nico? You can't keep risking yourself like that. He stood up, crossing his arms. You don't know what I'm going through, Nico said, shoving items into his backpack. Then tell me about it, Will urged, striding towards Nico. You wouldn't understand, Nico stated. Then make me understand, Will said, but got no answer. Will opened his mouth to speak when another yell interrupted him. It was the same yell as earlier. What was that? Nico shrugged as if he didn't know, but Will saw something sparked in his eye. No idea. Will went to the window, pulling the curtain aside. He saw campers exiting the cabins and running towards the beach. What's happening? Go find out, Nico said, a ghost of a smile on his face. Will headed to the door, seeing Nico follow him out of the corner of his eye. Will jogged out of the Hades cabin and towards the beach. Nico was following slowly behind him. Will arrived at the edge of the crowd. Next to Percy, Jason, and Frank, Annabeth and Piper were standing with Raina and Hazel a little way away. What is happening? He repeated, looking at Percy to see him squinting up at the sky. He looked up, covering the sun with his hand to see a shimmering bronze in the distance. One of the Stoll brothers was on scouting duty, and they saw whatever that is. We were trying to figure out what it is. He was cut off by a faraway scream, issuing from the bronze in the sky. Ah! I'm going to check it out, Jason said, taking off. He flew up until he spot of orange in the distance. They waited and heard another scream closer this time. Yeah! Piper frowned. That was Jason. What's he so excited about? The bronze figures started to take shape, the shape of a dragon, Festus. He heard Piper gasp and Percy grinning say, That little Leo, bad boy supreme is back, bae! Leo's voice screamed from the top of his dragon. Festus let out a roar, blowing out fire. The whole camp burst into cheers. He started his descent, and Will noticed an unknown girl sitting behind him. The crowd had cleared an open space so Festus could land, and the six pushed themselves to the inner circle. Jason landed, grinning wildly. Festus hit the ground with a deafening thunk, and the whole camp was silent. Leo slid off Festus, landing into a crouch, fist sinking into the sand. He slowly got up and said with a neutral expression, I'm back. The whole camp cheered again. Will watched as Jason ran up to Leo, tackling him in a hug. I knew you weren't dead. I just knew it. Jason's voice could be heard, even though it was muffled in Leo's shirt. I'm fine. Get off me, Leo said, but his tone was playful. Jason jumped up and pulled Leo to his feet. Jason put his hand on Leo's shoulder, looking happier than he had in weeks. Man, it's great to see Leonidas Valdez, Piper's voice rang out as she stormed over to Leo. Hey, beauty. He was cut off as Piper punched him in the face. Ah! He grabbed his face. Oh, ow. Where did you learn to punch like that? How dare you pull a stunt like that, Leo? She went in for another punch, but Jason held her arms back. We thought you were dead. I think I'm bleeding. Am I bleeding? He touched his jaw in concern. So much for a warm welcome. Oh, I will show you a warm welcome, Piper said, trying to free herself from Jason. Jason, let me go. Will could feel the charm speak resonate on the beach, and suddenly Jason released her. She slapped Leo across the face. She then wrapped her arms around him in a bear hug. Don't you ever do anything like that to me again. Will could see tears running down her face. Leo looked a little scared, wrapping his arms around her. Never again, beauty queen. His head buried into her shoulder. They stayed like that a minute longer before Piper broke it off. And if you do, she lunged towards him, and he stumbled back, falling over. Laughs rippled through the crowd. He brushed the sand off himself and cleared his throat. Percy greeted him with a complicated handshake, saying, Welcome back, man. Annabeth gave him a hug, saying she was glad he was back. Hazel hugged him as well, and Frank hugged both of them, picking them up, much to everyone's amusement. As everyone started saying their hellos, Leo cleared his throat. Yes, I will say hi to all of you eventually, as I know I am very popular. But first, you all might be asking Valdez, if you incinerated Gia a month ago and didn't die, why are you just getting back to camp? Leo said, pacing. He stopped. Well, ask and answer you shall receive. He started in an announcer's voice. She's a type of music she loves. Long walks on the beach, coming all the way from Ojo Gia, may I present the lovely, smoking hot Calypso. He gestured to Festus as a girl slid off his back. Will had heard the tale of Calypso, and he knew that no man ever found Ojo Gia twice. But Leo Valdez had found her. He had done the impossible. She smiled, grabbing hands with Leo. Calypso? Percy whispered in awe. Percy knew her. Calypso looked towards him, smiling softly. Her eyes were sad. Hello, Percy. I'm sorry. It's okay. I've forgiven you. You sure about that? Annabeth said, anger lining her features. Annabeth, Percy's eyes flashed at her before he looked back at Calypso. It is great to see you again. Calypso nodded. Her eyes were filled with regret. Will didn't know why. An easy silence settled over the gathering before Leo broke it. Well, that was sufficiently awkward, but Leo is back, baby, so let's get this party started. The crowd let out a roar of approval. He laughed as the seven got in a small circle. The seven of the great prophecy reunited again. Hold on. I have some questions, Piper spoke up. How long did it take you to find Calypso? Leo sheepishly scratched his head. I found her about a week after I disappeared. I think time works differently on Ojo Gia. His response caused looks of confusion to cross everyone's faces. Why didn't you come back sooner? Jason asked. I didn't realize how long I had been gone. I needed some reminding from an old friend, Leo said, answering the second question. As he spoke, Will noticed Leo's gaze shift over to the side. He followed his gaze and found him staring at Nico, who was leaning against a tree on the outskirts of the crowd. As more questions were asked of Leo, Will made a connection. Nico said he had been doing something important, and Leo mentioned being convinced by a friend. Nico had been searching for Leo. Alright, guys. Now I'm going to be finishing the story with our final chapter of this story. I hope you guys are liking this story. It's so much fun to read. And it's pretty long as well. It's going to be our longest video on this channel. Crazy. Anyway, Nico's point of view. He watched Leo interacting with the crowd, with his friends, a group that he would never be a part of. He sighed. This is Nico's point of view. I have to restart. Nico's point of view. He watched Leo interacting with the crowd, with his friends, a group he would never be a part of. He sighed and started to turn away to head back to his cabin. He was interrupted by a voice. Feeling left out? He turned back to see Drew, an Aphrodite camper. Feeling excluded? Excuse me, Nico said. You heard me. You feel excluded, and you are right to feel that way, because you are. I don't know what you're talking about, Nico stated. Yes, you do. You feel like you don't belong here because you don't. You cause destruction everywhere you go. Death follows you. You are poison to this camp. Nico could feel his temper rising. You have no right to say. And if that wasn't bad enough, you are also an abomination, a disgrace to humanity. You are disgusting. What are you talking about? Nico felt his heart quicken. You are a monster. Homosexuality is disgusting and sickening. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. It felt as though the ground had been removed from Nico's feet. How did she know? How did she find out? Oh, it's easy to find out. Being a daughter of Aphrodite helps. Watching you trail after Percy all those years was pathetic, because he would never love you. And now, the way you look at Will is so obvious. And it's absolutely disgusting, because it's not like he returns your feelings. He thinks you are a disgrace to demigod name. Stop it right now. Nico had a panic attack coming on. Disgrace, disgusting, abomination. You are a monster who doesn't belong here, so either leave or kill yourself, Drew told Nico. His heart stopped. Drew's lips curled into an evil smile. That's right. I noticed that you cut yourself as well. You think you are so secretive, but you are an open book. You are weak and pathetic and worthless. So do everyone a favor and kill yourself. Guys, this is not pointed at you. Don't worry. Shut up! A wave of emotion and dark energy flowed from Nico and rippled through the crowd. The crowd stopped talking and everyone turned to face Nico. The judging stares suddenly became too much for Nico. He pushed away from Drew and started a fast walk to his cabin. He was trying to take calming breaths, but it wasn't working. Drew's words continued running through his mind. He itched to get his hand on his blade, to feel the rip of his skin, and feel the blood running down his arms, to satisfy everyone by just ending it. Nico could feel an oncoming panic attack. He forced his cabin door open. He started hyperventilating, and he closed the door. He put his forehead against the door trying to regain his breath. With his hand shaking, he stumbled to his bedside table. He started pulling open drawers, searching, found a knife, and palmed it. He wanted to hurt himself. He wanted to really bad, but he wanted to get out of Camp Half-Blood first. He grabbed his backpack and started shoving clothes inside. Suddenly, Drew's words rang in his head. Abomination. He reeled back, head thudding. He gripped the blade tighter and leaned against the wall, eyes sliding shut, tears burning in his eyes. He slid down the wall, sobs ripping from his throat. He could feel the blade biting into his skin, and he welcomed the pain. He heard a knock at the door. He stopped his sobs and croaked out, "Leave me alone." He wiped his nose on his sleeve and continued to pack, feeling claustrophobic in his cabin. He heard the door crack open. "No," he whipped around, facing a surprised Solace. "Leave me alone." "Like how I'm going to do that? What's wrong? Leave me alone." "Nico, tell me what's going on. What's happening?" Will's demand sent Nico over the edge. "You want to know what's happening, Solace? I'm leaving Camp Half-Blood, and I am not coming back." Will's face fell in shock. "What? You can't be serious. Why?" "I had been planning to leave once I got Leo back to camp. He's the one who belongs here, not me." "That's not true. You belong here. You are welcomed here." Nico didn't answer. Instead, he focused on packing. "You can't just keep running away when things get hard from what scares you," Will said. The backpack dropped from Nico's hand as he rolled around on Will. "What scares me? Things get hard. You don't know a thing about when things get hard or when things scare you. You never watched your mother get incinerated in front of you. You never lost your sister after being promised she would be kept alive. You never had to find out that the powers make you an outcast and hated and fears those powers that could have brought your sister back but didn't because she moved on and forgot about you." Nico's voice cracked. Will could see the raw anguish in his eyes and understood that all the stress and pressure was finally getting on Nico. Something had gotten to him. The son of Hades had broken. "Your father doesn't think you are incompetent. You don't have to live with a secret that ostracizes you even further, a secret that makes you an abomination, fills you with self-loathing, a secret that puts on display and revealed a method of torture and humiliation that made you even more alone." What secret was Nico talking about? At some point, Nico started pacing around the room. He had tears shining in his eye, but he refused to let them fall. "Alone. Don't even get me started on alone. Alone and scared, terrified, absolutely horrified. I have one word. Tartarus. Just the mere sight of that place, the images almost make you go insane. The goddess of misery even told me I had too much pain and sorrow for even her to handle. I was kidnapped by giants, used as a pawn. That kind of fear, that kind of pure terror, it does stuff to you, stuff that you can't recover from." And Nico was frantic, gesticulating wildly, not fully in control of his emotions. And if Tartarus wasn't bad enough, you get another impossible task. Volunteering to move a colossal statue across the world because you are the only one who can. You are the only one who can, but people still fear you. You are the only one that can, but the effect causes you to almost fade into nothing, to lose yourself, to have your darkest secrets and thoughts regurgitated. His eyes had a haunted look to them, and he stared at something in the distance. Then you get somewhere where you are supposed to be safe, supposed to be accepted, and you screw it up by letting someone kill themselves. Will realized he was talking about Octavian. He had never blamed Nico for that. Never. Nico swallowed. And to still feel alone, even when surrounded by people who care, people who are afraid of you, people who you hurt, people who pity you and think you are weak. He looked up at Will, his eyes glistening with tears. "And it's true. I am weak. I am not strong. I can't even control my powers. I have panic attacks at random times. I slice my skin open. I'm plagued by nightmares that make it impossible to sleep." Nico took in a deep breath. "So yes, Solace. Yes, I have every right to run away from my problems and my emotions when things get hard and scary. I can't handle everything that is thrown at me. I have tried, but I can't. So I run and cut myself. I have been through so much pain and so much suffering that I just want to end it." He ended in a scream. Silence filled the room. "Nico," Will breathed. "Don't pretend to understand me. Don't pretend like you know what I'm going through, because you don't get it. You may be a damn good healer, but I am too shattered and broken to be healed." Nico sobbed. All the tension and stress seemed to go out of him as he slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor. Will was silent a moment before walking over to him. He sat next to Nico, his back against the wall. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I forget how much pain you suffered in your life," Will whispered. He lightly touched Nico's hand. Nico flinched away. Will slowly retracted his hand. It's not fair at all what you suffered. It's unimaginable, but I can tell you one thing. You are not alone. Even if you don't believe it, you have a basic friends and people you care about. And people who care about you. Raina, Hazel, and Frank are here looking for you, neglecting their duties at Camp Jupiter. For you. Percy, Annabeth, Jason, and Piper were also frantic when you went missing, and me. I care about you a lot, Nico. I would do anything for you, and I will always be here for you. Nico shook his head. No, you won't. You'll leave me just like everyone else. Will was aghast. Why would you say that? Because I'm a monster. I've killed people, destruction to death, wreak havoc wherever I go. I don't belong here. I'm a sick and disgrace. What, you aren't a disgrace. Why would you think that? Because I'm gay. The confession caused Will to fall silent. I don't know how Drew found out, but she probably told the entire camp. So now I don't belong because I'm an abomination. I'm attracted to guys rather than girls, and I was born in a time where people used to be locked up in an insane asylum for thinking this way. Nico was pulling at his hair with one hand, as if wanting to tear it out. The other hand gripped the blade tightly as tears poured down his face. Blood trickled down his arm. They tried to cure gay people, as if we have sickness. I'm abnormal and a freak and sickening and worthless, and I deserve to die. Nico's voice cracked on the last word. He started hyperventilating again, and the panic settled in. Alarm flashed in Will's face as he tried to speak comforting words to the son of Hades, who couldn't hear them. The world had muted. Will tried to force the blade out of Nico's hand, but Nico clenched his hand tighter. Will pried open Nico's clenched hand and withdrew the blade. No, no, no! Nico struggled to get it back. As he struggled, Will disposed of the blade. Nico started whimpering and curled into a ball, huddled against the wall. He just wanted it all to be over. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and he flinched away from Will. Will wasn't teetered, though, as he kept his hand on Nico's shoulder. He lightly pulled Nico's hands from his face. He lightly rocked Nico's hand in a bandage. As he secured that, he pushed Nico's chin up so his eyes met Will's blue one. He couldn't hear what Will was saying, but seeing him started to calm him down. He started breathing in sync with Will. The feeling of hysteria passed as the breaths evened out. The world finally unmuted. He stopped shaking. He didn't know how, but Will had been able to stop his panic attack. Better? Will asked. The concern in his face was almost palpable. Nico ignored the question, standing up. Will followed. Why are you here, Solace? His question caused the sound of Apollo to splutter. Why am I here? Because I care about you, Nico, and I care about your well-being, he said gently. You don't hate me? Hate you? I don't hate you. Why would you think that? Drew. Well, Drew is just jealous. What? She said you were sickened by me, by what I am. You don't have a sickness. You're not an abomination. I'm a healer, and I can tell you that you are not ill. You are perfectly fine, Nico D'Angelo. Homosexuality is not a disease, not a problem, nothing to be ashamed of, Will stated simply. But Drew is, well, a B-word. And everyone who has given you crap has no idea what they are talking about. At his words, Nico's heart jumped. You aren't disgusted by me? He asked tentatively. Of course I'm not. I would have to be disgusted with myself if I was with you. Wait, you mean you're gay? Yes. And are you disgusted with me? What? No. Did that piece of information change your opinion or view of me? No, why would it? Exactly. Oh, Nico understood what Will was doing. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Nico, and Drew only said those things because she liked me at one point and I rejected her. Well, because she's annoying and I'm gay and she's jealous of you. And the words didn't make sense to Nico. Jealous of me? Yes. Why? Wow, you really are dense, Will said, exasperated. Why do you think I stay up all night making sure you're okay, or make sure you are eating, or you aren't hurting yourself? Nico didn't allow himself to hope. Because you are my doctor? Well, yes, but there's another reason. Will trailed off, as expecting Nico to say something, but he didn't understand. Will rolled his eyes and gave an exasperated sigh before speaking again. Because I love you, Nico D'Angelo. I am in love with you. Confession warmed Nico to his core. William Solace, the very healer he had been crushing on, loved him? These thoughts continued to run through his head for a couple of minutes before Will interrupted them. Well, say something, Will pleaded. He grabbed Will's shirt and pulled him forward. Their lips collided, and Nico felt fireworks in the pit of his stomach. He watched as Will's eyes fluttered shut, and his eyelids closed as well. Nico was being pinned by Will against the wall as he took control of the kiss. Both of Will's hands were on the sides of his face, trying to give himself leverage on the kiss. He was kissing Will Solace. He had dreamed about this. His first kiss was with William Solace. Will freaking Solace! He broke off the kiss to breathe. Will's blue orbs opened, his eyes sparkling. "So I take it you returned my feelings," he said, smirking. "Shut up, Solace," he muttered, determined to kiss that smirk off Will's face. He leaned back, and Will met him halfway laying down. His hands tingled themselves into Will's hair, and Will let out an approving moan. He broke off the kiss again, and Will moved down to his neck, burying his face in his shoulder. He felt Will leave searing kisses on his neck. He felt tingles of pleasure work their way through his body. He tilted his head back, exposing his neck. "Am I interrupting?" Nico and Will both whipped toward the door. Jason was grinning at them. Nico felt his face turn beet red. Will's face looked similar. He felt mortified. "Took you long enough. Get out of my cabin, Grace." Jason chuckled. Come and join the rest of us when you're ready." He closed the door. Nico could faintly hear Jason's voice, then a shriek of excitement from Piper, who Nico guessed had been standing outside. He awkwardly looked back to Will, who was smiling, embarrassed. "Can I assume that you are staying and have gotten over this idea of leaving?" Yes, you can," Nico said, a smile working its way onto his face. "Good," Will noted, as he laced his fingers with Nico's. "So what does that make us? Friends?" "Nico, we were friends before." Nico kept a straight face. Through the incredulous face on Will's face made him want to laugh. He wanted to mess with Will. "No, you were my annoying doctor who forced me to hang out with him." "No. Now I suppose we could be friends." Will looked shocked. Nico bit his lip to keep himself from laughing. Nico burst out laughing. I'm kidding. Will looked at him in amazement. "What? I don't think I've ever heard you laugh before." He punched Will in the shoulder as he said this. "What? I'm being serious," he said, grinning. "And it is the cutest laugh I've ever heard." Nico spluttered. "Cute? I am not cute. I'm dark and brooding. I hang out with skeletons. I am the son of Hades. I bring the wrath of hell. I am the Ghost King," Nico stated, trying to look menacing, but Will just laughed. "Oh, my little ray of darkness. You are terrifying," he said with no menace, poking Nico on the nose. Nico smiled, but soon it slipped off his face. Will's eyebrows furrowed. "What? Are you sure you want to be with me?" Nico asked, his previous panic attack still fresh in his mind. Will smiled sadly, pulling his hand on Nico's face. "Of course I do. Why would your past change that?" "Because I'm broken." Nico's eyes closed as tears threatened them again. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean you cannot be fixed," Will gently stated. "Hey," he said lightly, jostling Nico's face. Nico opened his eyes and was met with Will's blue. "We will get through this, all of it together. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Let me help you." Nico smiled, but tears were still threatening. "Okay." Will smiled again and brought his lips to Nico's. Nico closed his eyes, the kiss feeling so gentle compared to the passionate one they had shared earlier. Will broke it off, putting his head against Nico's before pulling away. Their fingers were still interlocked. So he brought up their interlocked fingers. He kissed Nico on the back of the hand. "Are you ready to face the masses?" Nico fought down uneasiness. He took a deep breath, tried to calm down his nerves. "Sure." Will smiled and released his hand, opening the door to the cabin. There was a small crowd outside. Annabeth, Percy, Piper, Jason, Hazel, Frank, Leo, Calypso, and Raina. All of his friends. They all looked relieved when they saw Nico. When Will walked out behind them, the group let out a large roar, and "I told you so" and "about times" could be heard. Nico grinned sheepishly, interlocking his fingers with Will, who gave him a look, asking if it was okay. Nico nodded and brought Will's hands up, showing them to his friends. They all cheered and ran up to the two boys. Before he knew it, he was pulled from Will and into hugs from everyone. When they finally released him, Annabeth spoke first. "We are so glad you are back, Nico." "Where did you run off to?" Jason asked. "Are you okay?" Percy asked, looking not so discreetly at his wrist, a bandaged hand. Nico opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted. "When were you planning to tell us that you were searching for Leo?" Piper asked, raising her voice to be heard over the crowd. "Is that why you kept leaving camp and shadow traveling?" Lena asked. He barely had time to nod before Hazel asked a question. When were you going to tell me about Will? He held out his hand, asking for quiet. The demigods before him fell silent. Promise that I will answer all your questions in due time. But to answer Percy's question, Nico looked at Will. He interlocked his fingers. Better than I have been in a long time. Will beamed brightly and pecked Nico's cheek. Enough of that. Ever heard of too much PDA lovebirds? Leo spoke. Now since I'm back and the guy got the guy, everything is happily ever after. Let's go. Let's get this party started. Everyone laughed. Will pulled Nico to his side, arm loosely wrapped around his waist. Nico looked around at all his friends and family. He had finally found where he belonged, a place where he was wanted. Camp Half-Blood was finally his home. That took forever, but it was totally worth it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was so long. My mouth is actually dry. My lips, I don't know if you could tell, but my lips were getting really dry, and so I had to lick them because they were getting really dry. But that is the ending of Healing in the Dark, which is actually crazy. Tomorrow I will be reading the next book, hopefully, if I'm in the mood. It is my spring break, so it's not like I don't have time or anything. It is actually longer than this one. It's called Battling Demons, and I have also read this one many times, and I love this one. It's so much different than the other one, and also makes me really mad. You'll find out. I get really mad at Nico in this book. In the next one, I got mad at Nico when he insulted Will earlier, but now I get really offended. So yeah, just you wait. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you guys so much. Bye.